Hey guys, this is God Harry. How are you all? Please support and subscribe this channel for watching new interesting stories. This video includes a self-recorded human introduction in the first 30 seconds, followed by AI generated narration for creative storytelling purposes. So in this video, we're gonna see second part. What if Harry faced Voldemort at 5-year-old and became the youngest wizard? But before we start, if you want more stuff like this, then please support and subscribe this channel and share with your friends. Now let's start the video.
Here is short summary. At just 5 years old, Harry Potter confronts Voldemort and awakens extraordinary powers, marking him as the youngest and most powerful wizard in history. But before we start, if you want more stuffs like this, then please support to subscribe this channel and share with your friends. Let's start the video. No one in Slytherin seemed surprised that James won. That night in the common room, some of the older Slytherins snuck down to the kitchens and got a large supply of butterbeer and other snack foods. In one of the remote parts of the room, some of the older Slytherins, Gin, Mel, Vladimir, Kat, Roman, Triss and James were playing a very heated game of strip poker. So far Triss was winning, with Kat and Vladimir close behind. James, not the best at poker, was losing. "Okay, that's it, I fold out of the game," said James, dropping his cards on the table. "Why? Just one more round, your luck is bound to make a visit," Triss said, giving him puppy dog eyes. "One more round? One more round and I'll be streaking," James pointed out, motioning to his last piece of clothing, his boxers. "Please Jamesy Poo?" Triss asked, still giving him puppy dog eyes. James seemed to consider it for a second before giving his answer. "Not only no, but hell no," James answered. Rolling her eyes, Triss took another sip of her butterbeer and continued playing. A while later, the game ended with Triss as the winner. "Did you enjoy yourself?" James asked from an armchair near the fire. "Very much so, Mr. Cage," Triss answered, her voice slightly slurred from the countless bottles of butterbeer she had consumed. "Anyway, I'm going to bed. It's Hogsmeade weekend and I want to get an early start," said Triss, yawning. "Good night, love," said James Key, dotting her on the forehead and steering her towards the direction of the girls' stairs. "Night Jamsy Poo," Triss giggled, walking up the stairs of the girls' dormitory. James sighed and let Triss go up the stairs, wondering where she had come up with that name. Bounce. 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 Crash. What the F? K. James yelled, jumping up from where he had fallen on the floor. Triss was sitting cross-legged on his bed grinning madly. "What do you want?" James asked, sitting back on the bed. "We are going to Hogsmeade. An announcement was just made about a Halloween ball. Everyone has to dress up," Triss explained. "You're kidding?" James asked. "No, it was Karkaroff's idea. What do you think you're going to go as?" Triss asked. "I don't know, Slytherin maybe," James answered. "What about you?" "I don't know, I was hoping we could dress to match," said Triss, her eyes hopeful. James thought about it for a second. "I'll go as whatever you want me to, so long as there are no tights involved," James said finally. "Great, I was thinking we could go as Lord Celeborn and Lady Galadriel, from Lord of the Rings. It wouldn't be that hard to pull off, all we need are the robes," said Triss. "As I said, so long as you don't stick me in tights, I'll go along with anything you cook up. Do you want to go look around for robes while we're in Hogsmeade?" James asked. "Yes. If we find anything there, I'll mail Marie Malkin." "I still say she is the best designer around," Triss said. "Well, now that that has been settled, you will tell me where you got all of the sugar," James commanded. Triss put up a rather convincing angel act, but James saw through it. "You better tell me, Tristessa, or I will cut your supply of chocolate," James threatened. Triss looked at him like he had just told her he was cutting their bond and moving to Egypt. "Ginny and Mel have a stock of sweets in their rooms. They said I'm much more pleasant when I've had a lot of sugar, and I don't look so depressed," Triss spilled. James rolled his eyes. He would have to explain to Gin and Mel about Triss's trouble with sugar, and the way she reacted to it. "Well, go take a shower and get ready to go to Hogsmeade." "I'm going to do the same," said James. "Would you like me to join you?" Triss whispered in his ear. "As tempting as the offer is, love, I can't. We would never get to Hogsmeade," James responded, standing. Triss pouted but stood and walked back to her dorm to get dressed. What do you think about this? Triss asked, holding up an earthly brown and green gown. It must have been the 50th dress she'd looked at today. First things first, it's the wrong color, James said, finally getting frustrated. I think we need to shoot for white, silver, or some kind of light blue. How about this one? James asked, picking a dress off of the rack. The dress was as soft as cotton, textured like satin, but as heavy as velvet. Even at Triss's height of 5 feet 9, the dress would still touch the floor. The material was pure white at first sight, but in the right light it turned light shades of blue and purple. The neck was a little lower than James would have liked for being in the presence of others, but the long belled sleeves made up for it. At the waist of the dress was a Celtic knot silver chain that, if hung right, would give the dress an even more mysterious and elaborate look. Triss stared at the dress in wonder. It's perfect, Triss shouted, grinning. James rolled his eyes at his still hyper girlfriend's antics. Go try it on. I'm going to see if I can find a matching tunic and pair of leggings, said James, searching through a rack of men's formal clothing. 15 minutes later Triss returned, confirming that the dress fit and wouldn't need to be altered. James had also found an outfit that would go fairly well with Triss's. The leggings were plain white, while the tunic matched Triss's dress perfectly, right down to the strange fabric. To go under the tunic, James had a plain tight, white, nylon undershirt. I think we're set as far as our clothes go. Now we just need shoes, and possibly jewelry, said Triss, her sugar high almost gone. With that said, Triss bought a pair of lace-up-the-ankle white stilettos, not that anyone would be able to see them. James, to match the rest of his outfit, bought a pair of plain white boots. The lady at the register looked stunned at the sight of the dress, but rung it all up nonetheless. Thanks to a little of James's will magic, the outfits were both safely tucked away in James's pocket. With nothing else to do, James and Triss walked back up to the deserted form of Hogwarts. As the two walked, James heard a distinct whimpering and voices. Triss, however, had heard it before he had and was well on her way to finding out what it was. Several twisted corridors later, Triss and James came upon several Slytherin first and second years standing in a circle. Most of them had their wands out and were shouting lewd comments at whatever they were circled around. What the F.K. is going on here? Triss demanded. James actually had to stop himself from taking a few steps back. He knew better than to get in Triss's way when she was angry. He had said on more than one occasion that he would rather face down a basilisk unarmed and without any powers than face Triss when she was angry. The group of younger Slytherins jumped, but calmed down when they saw Triss. It was quite obvious that they, though house loyalty was going to get them out of whatever they had done. We were just finishing the job the Death Eaters started, one of the second years said. Stand aside, James commanded. As expected, his eyes fell on the crumpled and crying form of Elizabeth Dursley. Tessa, go get someone, I don't care if it's Dumbledore himself. You guys better sit down and make yourselves comfortable, said James, glaring down at the young Slytherins. The boys gulped and Triss ran off to get a teacher while James tried to patch up the little girl. Just James's touch seemed to be enough to calm her so that she was no longer curled up. Elizabeth? James asked, his voice soft and comforting. The little girl looked up at James through her puffy blue eyes and recognition shone in them. Who are you? The girl asked. James Cage. I'm a student here, I'm in my 4th year. My friend Triss went to go get one of the teachers to punish the boys that hurt you, James explained. Elizabeth's blue eyes lit up with fear, remembering why James was standing over her in the first place. No worries, if any of them so much as look at you wrong, they have to deal with me, James said, glaring at the young Slytherin boys. Elizabeth seemed to calm at that, though. I'm Lizzie. I live in the castle with my Aunt Lily, Uncle Jim, and cousins Holly and Sarah, said Elizabeth with innocence only kids could have. Really? How do you like life in the castle? James asked. It's fun. Aunt Lily and Uncle Jim let me have free run of the castle so long as I don't bother anyone, Elizabeth said with a grin. Before James could comment on how dangerous it was for Elizabeth to run around the castle unattended, Potter made an appearance. What is going on here? He demanded, looking down at Lizzie's tear-streaked face and the Slytherins sitting against the wall. Several students I'm ashamed to call my housemates attacked your niece. I sent Tessa off to get a teacher, James explained. Potter looked ready to start taking points when Snape came down the hallway, Tris a few steps behind him. Detention, all of you. Meet Filch in the dungeons tonight at 8, and every night this week, Snape growled, looking at the group of boys. Potter gaped as the boys took off towards the Slytherin dorms, Snape close behind. That's one way to handle things, Tris commented. James nodded. James. A voice called. James looked up from his dinner to see Lizzie Dursley walking towards him. Hey Lizzie. What's up? James asked. Over the last couple of weeks the little girl had been hanging out with he and Tris, as there wasn't anyone else to really hang out with around her age. After the hallway incident none of the first years, which were only a year older than she was, would hang out with her anymore. Do you think you could help me with my costume for the party tonight? Aunt Lily said she was too busy, Lizzie said solemnly. I don't think I could help you, but I'm sure Tris, Kat or Mel would be willing, James answered. Of course, said Kat, who was dinning with the Slytherins for the first time in a while. I think this is one of the many events I shall leave to Kat, said Tris. Lizzie looked a bit disappointed that Tris wouldn't be helping her dress, but got over it fairly quickly. Well ladies, I think it's about time we head off to start getting ready. Kat, are you going to change in the Slytherin dorms with Tris, Mel and Jin? James asked. Yeah, are you going to the Gryffindor dorms with Rome and Vlad? Kat asked. Sad as I am to admit it, yes. Anyway, I'll meet you outside of the Great Hall, James said, giving Tris a lingering key on the lips. All right, is everyone ready to roll? Rome asked. He was dressed up as Peter Pan, as to match Kat, who was going as Wendy. I am Vidi, Vlad said. He was dressed up as Prince Charming, while Mel was going as Cinderella. What about you, James? Rome asked. Almost. James yelled from the bathroom. A few minutes later he emerged, making both boys' jaws drop. He hadn't changed at all as far as height and build, he was still 6 feet 3 inches with lots of muscle, but his normally tanned skin was a glowing lily white, making his fiery blue eyes stand out. His once short brown hair was now blonde, hanging just below his shoulders. 2 braids hung in the front of his hair, showing he was a bonded warrior. Damn. Just. Damn. Said Rome, examining James's outfit. I look forward to see what Tris is dressed like, Vlad commented. James shot him a look, but otherwise didn't say anything. Well, the dance starts in 30 minutes, so shall we go pick up our dates? Rome asked. The other 2 boys nodded, both eager to see how their dates would look. 35 minutes later, 15 of which were spent sitting in the chamber outside of the hall, the group of girls arrived. Lizzie, led by Kat, was dressed in a soft pink gown with 5 wings sticking out of the back. Her blonde hair was curled and pulled into a ponytail, making her look like she could pass for at least a second year. Over her eyes she wore a pink eye mask, making her light blue eyes stand out. Kat, who stood a few feet behind Lizzie, wore a long-sleeved periwinkle gown that accented the many curves of her body. Her normally frizzy brown hair was now straight and silky. Around her neck she wore a sapphire pendant held by a Celtic knot chain that Rome had gotten her for her birthday. Around her eyes she wore a soft blue eyeshadow that made her honey brown eyes stand out. To Kat's right was Mel. Like Kat, she wore a gown, but her gown was a much darker blue. Unlike Kat's, it didn't show off her body, but it did accent her strong figure. Also unlike Kat's gown, the sleeve only came to just off of her shoulder. From her elbow down she wore a pair of white gloves. Most likely by Tris's hand, Mel's hair was wrapped around a diamond and platinum tiara. In the very back of the group stood Tris. James was sure that if his jaw wasn't firmly attached it would have fallen off, as his jaw was dangerously close to the ground. As promised, Tris wore the gown she had bought several weeks before. It fit her almost as a second skin. Tris's normally slightly tanned skin was now milky white, almost matching the dress, with a moonlit glow surrounding her. Her normally auburn locks were now a very pale, almost silver, blonde, and her blue eyes were deeper than ever. She looked every bit the elven lady she was dressed as. James just stood, gaping at the image before him. He was so shocked by Tris's beauty that he didn't even glare at Rome and Vlad, who both were shooting Triss's low neckline a glance or two. You look beautiful, Tessa, James finally managed to say, his eye still wandering over his bonded's outfit. I think she looks like one of the elves that helped me when my parents died. You look a lot like the boy who took that curse for me, James, Lizzie said, studying the pair. Well, I think it's time to get to the dance, Kat said, taking Rome's hand. James nodded, finally having gained control, and wrapped his arm possessively around Triss's waist. Mel and Vlad also joined hands, while Lizzie was on James's other side, his free hand resting protectively on her shoulder. Upon entering the hall, the group was met by a frazzled-looking Lily Evans Potter. Running around her legs were two pumpkins James could only guess were Holly and Sarah. I need your name, and the name of your character, said Evans, not even looking up. Cat Snape, Wendy from Peter Pan. Rome Lupin, Peter Pan. Mel Crew, Cinderella. Vlad Crumb, Prince Charming. Lizzie Dursley, Thumbelina. Evans looked up at Lizzie's name, and downright stared when she saw her costume. Who helped you dress up, Lizzie? Evans asked. It was quite obvious she hadn't expected to see Lizzie there, in costume anyway. Kat and Mel helped. They did my makeup and my hair, Lizzie answered. Evans nodded, not pushing the subject. James Cage, Lord Celeborn. Triss Summers, Lady Galadriel. Upon seeing their costumes, Evans nearly fainted. The two of them bore a startling resemblance to the two elves from the World Cup. Maybe this wasn't the best of ideas, said Triss as they walked more fully into the hall. The two of them were getting several looks of recognition, especially from the teachers and Gryffindors. Well, it's too late to change anything now. I really don't think we'll be bothered though, unless it's by that grandfather of yours, James said, throwing a look up at Dumbledore, who was rubbing his eyes at the sight of them. Much to James's surprise, it was Fudge that came after them. What do you think you are doing? Showing off your forms like that? Do you have any idea how much trouble I'm having keeping the press off of you both? Now you go and do this. Why'd I even try? He ranted, ignoring the looks he was getting from others around him. Hold on, you think this is how we really look? Nowhere near. This is just a guise we cooked up to go to the ball with, Triss said, snickering. Fudge turned about 10 shades of red, but didn't burst. You both better feel very lucky that I am indebted to you because of the events of the World Cup, Fudge grumbled before walking away. Well, someone pulled the stick out of his ass, Jules' voice said in James's mind. Hey, where are you? James asked, looking around. Coming up on your right. James looked to his right and saw Jewel walking towards him, in human form. Her dress was very loosely cut, but still made a point to show off the would-be snake's human body. The dress itself was dark purple with gold clips at the top of each shoulder, and one on the belt tat was slung on her waist. Her blonde hair was swept back into a high ponytail, keeping it out of her face and making her green eyes stand out. Jewel, what the hell are you doing here? James asked, turning to the woman. I thought I should join in the festivities, Jewel said, the Parseltongue accent present in her voice. Triss blinked once or twice at the figure. Jewel, looking good. I see you finally figure the transformation out, Triss said, examining Jewel's human body. Jewel grinned, showing off her pearly white teeth. That I did. I think I pulled it off nicely, Jewel said. Triss nodded in agreement. James just shook his head. Somehow he wasn't surprised Triss knew about Jewel's new form. Are you going to be dining with us? James asked. If I'm invited, said Jewel. Of course, Triss answered. Triss and Jewel walked away chatting and James started to head off to visit with Rome and Vlad when he felt a hand pull at his sleeve. Still standing at his side was Lizzie. Do you think I could sit with you guys during dinner? I don't want to go sit at the teacher's table, it makes people stare, Lizzie said. Of course you can, if it's okay with your Aunt Lily, James said. Lizzie grinned and ran off to go make sure her new seating arrangement was okay with her aunt. You know, that kid. Sure hangs out with you and Triss. A lot, said two familiar voices. James turned to greet the twins, and nearly fell over. The twins didn't look at all like the twins. Instead there were two Egyptian women, decked out in full. Both were wearing long slit-up-the-side gold skirts and sequined strapless shirts, showing off their newly added, and fake, Easts. Also, their trademark Weasley red hair, and freckled skin had been replaced with smooth, darkly tanned skin, and long, straight, black hair. Covering their faces was a sheet of beads that covered everything from the eyes down. You two didn't go cross on me, did you? James asked, staring. Shish. No one can know it's us. We want to see how many guys we can get to dance with us, one of them, James could tell which, said. Well, you two need to change your voices then, James commented. That's why we came to you. Do you think you could charm them for us? The other twin asked. James rolled his eyes, and waved his hand slightly. Well, have fun, ladies, James said, trying not to laugh as he left the twins to their mischief. Who were they, James? Triss asked when he caught up with the ever-growing group of girls. Fred and George, they want to see how many guys they could trick. They needed me to charm their voices, James responded. Triss nearly choked on her glass of pumpkin juice. Triss was about to comment when Lizzie appeared. James, my aunt said I could eat with you guys, Lizzie said, buzzing with excitement. Great. You can sit there, said James, pointing to the only empty seat, between Jewel and Rome. Lizzie grinned and nodded. A few minutes later, Madame Maxime called for attention. The hall grew silent and all eyes turned to Dumbledore. Greetings, students, he yelled. He proceeded to make a rather annoying speech, and then explained how you were to order your food and drinks. When he finally sat down, the groups of students dug in. Dinner was a very quick affair, and within the hour students were dancing in the now cleared hall. May I have this dance? James asked, turning to Triss. Triss nodded and accepted his offered hand. Over the next few hours, James proceeded to dance with almost every girl that asked him, however he still danced with Triss more than anyone else. At the very end, James figured he'd danced with almost every girl currently in the school, including Evans, the only current female professor. At 1:45 Madame Maxime called for attention. Over the past several hours the professors and heads of our schools have been casting votes for the best students as far as costume and dancing have gone. The results are thus. For the most creative costumes, Fred and George Weasley. Madame Maxime called out. James laughed at the green tinge in several of the male students' faces, and Fred and George walked up to the stage. Karkaroff gave them a small trophy with a mask on it. For best male dancer, James Cage. She yelled. James quickly collected a small trophy from Karkaroff with a male wizard in dress robes on it. For best female dancer, Susan Bones. Like those before her, the redhead quickly collected her prize. For best looking costume, Tristessa Summers. Triss, like James and Susan, was quick about getting her trophy. And finally, for best looking couple, James Cage and Tristessa Summers. Maxime called. That is the second time that woman has said my full name, Triss growled under her breath. James snickered, earning a discreet pinch from Triss. All too soon the couple was walking back to the common room, by themselves, as they had to take Lizzie back to her room. Did you have fun? James asked. Yes, but I can think of better things to do with the night, Triss whispered in his ear, grinning wickedly. So what do you think the medallion could mean? Triss asked, looking at the strangely marked medallion. Fudge had returned the vampire medallions to the champions earlier that week. James looked up from where he was reading on the floor. It's a mermaid's medallion. The inscription talks about finding something lost before it is lost forever, James responded. Whatever it is, it has to do with the lake. It's also, at times like these, I'm glad to be a shapeshifter. I'm probably going to have to go down and bicker with the mermaids. Okay. Hey, what's this? Triss asked, looking at a notch in the back of the medallion. James held up his hand and Triss tossed it to him. I don't know. It wasn't there before. Oh well, I don't feel like pondering it right now. The second task is tomorrow, so I'm going to get to bed, said James, yawning and setting the medallion on his bedside table. Triss pouted. Does that mean I'm being kicked out? She asked. No, you're welcome to join me, but only for sleep, said James, stripping down to his boxers. Triss pouted again, but did end up joining James for the night, if only for sleep. Hey, has anyone seen Triss? James asked, sitting down at the breakfast table the next morning. She was here about 10 minutes ago, but Evans had to talk to her. Something about not being in her dorm last night, said Kat, giving James a pointed look. What? It's not like you don't run off with Rome, and we didn't do anything anyway, said James, pouring himself a glass of orange juice. Kat blushed and didn't comment further. So, I take it you're not nervous about the next task, said Mel, watching James scoop food onto his plate. Should I be? James asked, taking a bite of sausage. Mel shrugged. I don't know. Do you know what the task is? She asked. It has something to do with the lake. The medallion they gave me was engraved with mermaid symbols, so I assume I need to go talk to them, James answered. Well, if you plan on getting there in time for prepping, you best go now. They will be down soon, said Vlad, munching on a piece of toast. James nodded, took a few bites of his eggs and headed out towards the lake. Sure enough, stands were set up around the sides, and a lot of the stands were full. Somehow I'm not surprised, James said to himself, walking towards the stands. Within an hour, the rest of the champions arrived, and they were getting ready to go. James was still a little concerned with the fact that Triss hadn't yet shown up, but he wasn't too worried. She had been acting weird all week, so James figured she either was still with Evans, who also hadn't arrived, or James just hadn't seen her when she did show up. Welcome to the second task of the Triwizard Tournament. The object of the task is to get to the bottom of the lake and retrieve what is waiting for them. On your mark, get set, go. Ludo Bagman yelled. Well, at least it wasn't drawn out, James thought, diving into the water wearing only his boxers. As soon as he was out of the view of anyone on the surface, he subtly changed his hands to be webbed, and let a pair of gills open behind his ears. I feel like something out of Water World, James thought with a laugh. 15 minutes later, James was getting annoyed, as he still had yet to even see the bottom. The closest champion to himself was Victor, who was transfigured into a rather deformed shark, about 500 feet behind him. After another 5 minutes of swimming, James came to his first obstacle. Floating in the middle of the water was a pissy-looking merman. It started to charge him with its spear, but a flash of James's claws stopped it in its tracks. I am a friend. I've been told that something of mine is down here, James said calmly. The merman looked at him queerly for a second before lowering his weapon and backing away with a nod. James nodded his thanks. After another 5 minutes, James finally did reach the bottom and nearly choked. Tied to a large mermish totem pole were 4 people, all wearing dark green medallions. The first was a young blonde girl that bore a resemblance to Fleur. The second was a 5th-year Ravenclaw James knew to be Cedric's girlfriend, Cho Chong. The third was a woman of about James's age that he'd never seen before. The last person was the one that nearly sent James off into a fit of rage. Tied to the pole between Cho and the little girl was Triss. Wasting no time, James quickly sliced the rope on Triss and started to swim up with her. Her eyes were closed, and as far as he could tell, she wasn't breathing. On the way up he met Victor, and James, being James, handed the young man a small dagger that he kept strapped to his leg. About 50 feet from the surface, James stopped, when he felt Triss start to struggle. Her once closed eyes were panicked and she was gasping for air. James quickly covered her mouth with his and started pumping air into her lungs from his gills. After swimming about 10 more feet, James noticed a growing cloud of red, and that Triss was clutching her stomach in pain. Fearing what could be wrong with his bonded, James shot up to the surface as fast as he could. A few seconds after breaking the surface, Triss cried out in pain. James, it hurts, Triss cried, clutching James's arm. It's all right, love, James whispered, using what powers he could to send Triss a pain reliever. She stopped crying out, but she was still in obvious discomfort. Upon reaching the shore, James was pounced on by Poppy and the other nurse. What happened? Poppy demanded, casting spells like a mad woman. About 50 feet from the surface she woke up, so I gave her an air source. A few seconds later the water was full of blood. What happened? James asked, his hand tightly wrapped in Triss's. I'm not sure yet. Tammy, keep an eye on the other students, check them when they come up. Pomfrey ordered. The other nurse nodded. By that time, the group had gained an audience, including Dumbledore, Evans, Karkaroff, Potter, Snape, Maxime, and Jewel, who was once again watching in human form. James, float her to the hospital wing. James did as he was told, quickly casting a stretcher charm, and following the frantic Poppy to the hospital wing. Upon entering the wing and setting Triss on the bed, James was shoved out of the wing by Poppy. Not bothering to cast any type of charm on his sopping body, James sat down on the floor, leaning against the wall across from the infirmary door. 20 minutes later, Poppy still hadn't come out of the hospital and James was getting agitated and jumpy. Nearly 10 minutes before Evans had arrived, along with the rest of the teachers. The students had been told to stay away from the hospital wing until told otherwise. Seeing one of her most stable students sitting on the ground, his head in his hands, and sopping wet, she set off to comfort one of her most prized students. A drying spell and blanket later, James was still very tense. James nearly lost his cool, however, when Dumbledore approached him. "Mr. Cage, I think it would be best if you return to your dormitory. All other students have been told to stay out of this corridor, and I don't think you should be an exception," he said. James was about a breath away from hexing the headmaster, but instead chose to release a bit of stress. "Look, you manipulative old bastard, I have more right to be here than anyone else in the world. And if you even mutter one word about being her grandfather, I won't hesitate to break your oversized beak. If you actually cared about her at all, you would not have stood by and let her be abused by her father for over 7 years. If you cared about her at all, you wouldn't have tried to override everything in the ministry to send her back to that monster. I am her sole bond, and if you have a problem with that, shove it up your ass." James yelled, his eyes becoming darker with every word. In the time he'd been speaking, he'd managed to back Dumbledore into a corner, so the old man was quite trapped by the much bigger boy. You have no right." Dumbledore started, his face turning red. James cut him off. "I have no right to speak to you like that. No, I think I have every right. You have been meddling in my life since the day I was born, and are one of the main reasons my parents are dead. If you had just left me the F.K. alone, they would still be alive. From this day on, you have no right to meddle in neither Triss's nor my life. If I ever so much as smell one of your limo drops anywhere near myself or Tessa, I will strip you of your title as headmaster, as is my right as the heir of Rowena Ravenclaw. Do I make myself clear?" James growled. His body was almost pulsing with magic and static electricity was snapping and crackling around him. Dumbledore just stared, completely dumbstruck by the teenager's use of power, as well as his newly discovered status as Ravenclaw's heir. Almost everyone else in the room also looked stunned at James's power, with the exception of Snape, who looked highly amused. "Do I make myself clear?" James yelled again when the older man didn't answer. Dumbledore nodded slightly, and for effect, James hit the stone right next to the headmaster's head hard enough to shatter it into a million pieces, and crack several other pieces of stone. With his temper tantrum over, and his power reverting to normal, James sat back down at his spot on the floor, ignoring the fearful looks he was getting. Hearing the racket, Poppy poked her head out of the door. Seeing the damage on the stone walls, the fearful looks being cast in James's direction, and James's adrenaline-shaken form, she called for James. "What happened?" Poppy asked. "Dumbledore was being a bastard, so I told him what I thought of him, and said a few things that I maybe should have kept to myself," James sighed, rubbing his now pounding head. "What did he say to you?" Poppy asked. "He told me I needed to leave, as no other students were being permitted in the hallway. I let loose a lot of my power, and told most of the teacher about my connections with Rowena," said James. Poppy glared at him disapprovingly, but didn't say anything. "Can you tell me what's wrong with Tessa?" "No, you're too stressed right now. Get some sleep, and I will explain it to both of you when you wake up," said Poppy, placing a comforting hand on James's shoulder. Looking at his watch, James was surprised to find it was only 1 in the afternoon. Nodding to his older confidant, James walked back to the privet room Poppy had put Triss into and quietly laid down next to his bonded, gently gathering the sleeping young woman into his arms. "So, are you going to tell me what the F.K. happened now?" James asked, following Poppy out of Triss's room. Poppy glared at him for his use of language. "Do you promise not to do anything rash?" James nodded. Can I reserve the right to stun you should you break that promise? I don't know how much good that would do if it were something for me to be really pissed about, but okay, said James. Tessa was with child, Poppy said after a brief pause. James looked at the older woman, completely dumbstruck. Hold on, what do you mean was? James asked, his hands starting to shake. Poppy took a deep breath and started to explain. I mean just that, was. The spell that was cast on her, mixed with the pressure that was being held on her body at that depth, caused her to miscarry. James just stared at the older woman, as if waiting for her to tell him it was all a joke. When she didn't, he asked one of the questions that was bugging him. Did she know? She was 6 weeks along, so she could have, but she might not have figured it out yet, Poppy responded. Who cast the spell? I'm not sure, but even if I did know, I wouldn't tell you, said Poppy, giving James a meaningful look. James ran his hand through his hair nervously. Shit, I'm just not having it today, he thought to himself. His hands were shaking with fury, yet he was scared. He was scared for Triss, and what her reaction to the news would be, yet he was furious for Triss having allowed someone to cast that spell on her in the first place. He was afraid of what his professors would think, but seeing that one of his professors would cast a spell like that on someone so close to him. Hell, he was scared of Jewel, because he knew she would kill him, and he didn't just mean figuratively. Great, the proverbial shit has just hit the fan. James, are you alright? Poppy asked. No, I'm not. You know, that would be the sixth person that has been taken away from me, because I am me. First my real parents and would-be adopted father, my foster parents, and now my own child. This is such bullshit, James yelled, his voice slightly hysterical. Poppy looked down at the young man, feeling sorry for the young man she had known for so many years. James, it's not your fault. It wasn't anyone's fault, just a big accident. For all you know, the child wouldn't have lived anyway, or Triss would have chosen not to keep it. Plus, if the child had been born, and all was well, what would you have done with it? You're still in school, and I know you wouldn't have dropped out, said Poppy. James nodded. You're right, but it still doesn't make me feel any better, he growled. Look, I need to go talk to Dumbledore, and file a few reports. Go back to Triss's room, she's going to need someone there when she wakes up. You have to explain what happened to her, and keep her as calm as possible. That spell did some internal damage, nothing permanent, but nothing I want to have to fix again, said Poppy. I take it you're going to tell Dumbledore about this whole affair? James asked. Poppy nodded. Even if he doesn't have custody of Triss, he needs to be informed as headmaster. I'll try and keep him away from here, but if he does show up, please refrain from killing him. I don't think it would help matters very much, said Poppy. Yeah, but it would sure as hell make me feel better, James growled as he walked back to Triss's room milling over the day's events. Did you know Mr. Cage was the only known heir of Rowena Ravenclaw? Lily Evans Potter demanded upon entering Dumbledore's office. No, replied Dumbledore. Why the hell not? You were supposed to keep tabs on all of the heirs, and what is he talking about when he says his parents' death is partly your fault? Potter asked. I don't know how I didn't know about him. As for his parents, I don't know. The only Muggle family I know, besides my son's family, is that of Alexander and Emma Keller, and they and their son were murdered by Voldemort near 10 years ago, said Dumbledore. Lily paled slightly at the name, but didn't say anything. Wasn't that the same attack that Voldemort disappeared after? Potter asked. It was, said Dumbledore thoughtfully. What, are you trying to say that Mr. Cage was their son and somehow escaped, and or destroyed Voldemort? Evans asked. It's plausible. It would explain a lot as far as his powers and why he's always in the middle of everything. If any of this is in any way true, then that could also explain how his name was entered in the goblet, Dumbledore said, thinking aloud. Okay, let me sum this up. It is possible that our student, James Cage, the heir of Rowena Ravenclaw, is really James Keller, and that somehow, at the age of 5, was able to either kill and or escape from Voldemort himself, Potter said, ticking things off on his fingers as he went. No, it couldn't be, because it said in the ministry report that they had found the bodies of all members of the family. None of the remains could be visually identified because they were charred beyond recognition, said Dumbledore, leaning back in his chair. Sitting on top of one of Dumbledore's bookcases, sat the Sorting Hat, who was taking in all that was said, waiting to send a message to one, Mr. James Cage. Dumbledore's office, 15 minutes later. She's what? Dumbledore yelled, standing up from his chair. Was. Keyword Albus. Because of that spell someone so irresponsibly cast on her, she miscarried the child. As it is, Mr. Cage was about a hair's breadth away from coming to kill the one who'd cast the spell, Poppy said, giving the headmaster a livid glare. If you don't mind telling me, who cast the spell in the first place? It was me, a meek voice said. Evans, still sitting in the same chair she had been earlier, said, tears welled up in her eyes. She had tried to tell me something before I cast it, but she never got it out. Oh God, Evans said, her head in her hands. Poppy, was there any reason to say that the child wouldn't have lived anyway? Potter asked, trying to console his wife. Poppy shook her head. Besides lack of oxygen, no. The child would have been born perfectly healthy, Poppy said, feeling no pity for the younger professor. Very well, Poppy. Please send Mr. Cage and Ms. Summers my condolences. Also, I'm sure the two of them would prefer if the student body wasn't notified. Jim, please go inform Severus of what has happened, he is their head of house, and will need to be informed, said Dumbledore, nodding to Poppy and Potter in turn. The two of them nodded, leaving the distraught professor for Dumbledore to deal with. James? Triss asked groggily, feeling the air wrapped around her waist. For reasons she couldn't figure out, she hurt all over, but most of it was centered in her abdomen. She felt a shift behind her, and a hand lightly brushing a few stray hairs out of her eyes. Hello, love, James said, ing the young woman's forehead. I feel like I got hit by a truck. What happened? Triss asked. I'll tell you, Tessa, but first I have to ask you a question. Did you know you were pregnant? James asked. He felt Triss's body grow tense, and he had his answer. I'm not mad that you didn't tell me, Tessa. I'm sure you had your reasons, but the reason you hurt so bad has a lot to do with the baby, James explained softly. Triss looked up at him in confusion, before a look of horror crossed her face. No, please tell me that there isn't something wrong with our baby, she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. I'm sorry, Tessa. Someone cast a spell on you. They were using students in the tournament, and you were one of them. The spell deprived the baby of oxygen, and the depth that put you it caused you to miscarry. There is no baby anymore, James whispered. It was Evans. She made me come to her office from breakfast, and asked me if I was willing to partake somewhat in the tournament. I told her no, and tried to tell her why, but she cast the spell before I could say anything, Triss sobbed. Not really know what else he could do. James pulled Triss into his arms, letting her latch onto him as she cried until she fell asleep. How is she? Poppy asked upon returning to the hospital wing. James now had Triss fully in his lap, sound asleep, as he slowly rocked her back and forth. She didn't take it very well. Apparently Evans cast the spell on her, without her consent. I fear what she's going to do to her when she wakes up, said James quietly, trying not to wake Triss. Yes, well, Dumbledore sent Potter down to inform Snape of what was going on, so you can expect a visit from him very soon, said Poppy. Thanks for the warning. God knows he's going to be pissed when he gets here, James said, groaning at the fact that he would have to deal with his father. I can also probably expect a visit from Jules soon as well. Poppy shook her head. Come on, let's get her settled in the bed. Goodness knows that Severus will not be quiet upon his entrance. James nodded and very reluctantly placed Triss back on the bed, pushing a little of his energy out as to keep her sleep. Sure enough, almost as soon as Poppy had shut and warded, the doors of the main part of the infirmary were slammed open. James Shadow Alexander Cage, a very loud and very irritated masculine voice yelled. And so the show begins, James growled under his breath. What can I do to help you, Professor? Snape's face turned from pale and irritated, or red and murderous. What can you do to help me? You can help me by telling me why you impregnated some whore you picked up on the crack. Instead of upright and yelling, Snape was laying on the floor, his face once again pale and a shocked expression on his face. Forming around his left eye and down his jawbone was a livid black bruise. Dad, I swear to God that if you ever talk about her like that again, I will do more than blacken your eye, James growled, pulling the older man up by his collar. At that moment, Jewel came running into the room, closely followed by Potter, and surprisingly, Sirius and Remus. Put him down, James. Jewel yelled, her eye boring into James's own. James didn't hesitate to drop him, knowing full well, he'd let his anger get the best of him. Poppy, do what you can for Severus, James and I need a moment to talk, Jewel said, looking over at the dumbstruck Poppy. Poppy nodded, and Jewel pulled James off to an empty room, warding to room as well. Jewel, you really don't need to lecture me. I know I screwed up, James sighed, running a hand through his hair. Jewel shook her head. That's not what I'm here about. As far as Snape goes, congratulations, he had it coming. We heard what he said on the way here. Be thankful what you said wasn't loud enough for the rest of them to hear, otherwise we'd be in deeper shit, Jewel said. What do you mean, deeper shit? James asked. To start things off, Dragon is missing. No one has seen him in a while, so your Aunt Libby put out a missing persons notice. Next on the list, the hat you have spying for you in Dumbledore's office has come through. Dumbledore and his crew have come very close to figuring out who you really are, but Fox, Dumbledore's bird, saved your ass. He manipulated Dumbledore, Potter and Evan's minds. And last, but not least, the media is in frenzy. It's not every day you see Dumbledore backed into a wall by a student, Jewel explained. Bloody brilliant, James growled. Be grateful. Fudge is covering your A.S. rather well. When did he come to his senses anyway? James grinned. I think it was when I yelled at him for being a prick. Here is a good question though, how is it that you have access to the school in human form? Do you have any idea how much those French girls look alike? I can just blend into them. I've even been mistaken for the champion, Fleur, once or twice, Jewel laughed. James rolled his eyes. Snakes. Ouch. Remind me never to get on that kid's bad side, Sirius said, eyeing the darkening bruise on Snape's face. Remus shook his head sadly. Can't say he didn't have it coming though, Remus said. Sirius nodded in agreement. A few minutes later James and Jewel returned. And who might this lovely lady be? Sirius asked. Dotting Jewel's hand. James had to fight the urge to laugh. Jewel Keller. You two must be Sirius and Remus, Jewel said, playing along. Sirius nodded. How, might I ask, do you know our names? I told her about the both of you. She was here to see me in the tournament, James said, ending the line of questioning. And how, may I ask, do you know Mr. Cage, Ms. Keller? Potter asked. James nearly rolled his eyes at the question. Trust Potter to be nosy. Thankfully Jewel had already thought up an answer. I used to babysit James and Tris when Derek, their guardian, was away on business. Derek? James asked. Don't tell me you never knew Dragon's real name, Jewel asked in outrage. James mentally shook his head, but didn't answer further. Okay, so what are you two doing here? James asked, his question directed to Sirius and Remus. Snape seemed to have slipped out of the room already. We came to see the tournament, and we saw the thing with Tris. Is she okay? Remus asked. I'm fine, a groggy voice said from the doorway. Standing slightly crouched over was Tris. Within seconds James was next to her. If not for him, she probably wouldn't have been standing at all. Fine my ass, James growled. Tris laughed a little, but decided that hurt too much. Hey Tris. We're sorry about the baby, Sirius said, following James as he led Tris back to her room. Don't tell me the news of that is out already, Tris groaned. Not really. We heard Snape yelling about it before James hit him, said Sirius. You what? Tris yelled, rounding on James. Don't bother yelling at him, Tris. Z-Bat deserved it, Jewel said, the French-like accent come forward. Tris shook her head. I'll take your word for it, Jewel. If you guys don't mind, I'm not feeling too well, and am going back to sleep, Tris said, rolling back into the blankets of the bed. You do that then. Sirius and I will be on our way. Take care you two, And James, do us a favor and hit Snape again. Lily, what are you doing up? James Potter asked with a yawn. Sitting on the couch in the middle of the common room was Lily Evans, bent over an album of photos. The one she was currently looking at was of Sarah and Holly on the first day they were born. Both were pink and fussy, but beautiful in their own right. Now both little girls were almost 4, and still identical in every way. I couldn't sleep, Lily replied, drying her now tear-filled eyes. Sweetheart, why are you crying? Jim asked, sitting down next to his wife. A choked sob escaped Lily's throat. I feel so guilty. She told me she didn't want to be part of it, and tried to tell me why, but I ignored her, and cast the spell anyway. It's because of me that their baby is dead, she cried, leaning into her husband. No, Lils, it's not your fault. You just did what you were told by Dumbledore. It was all just one big accident, James cooed, rocking his wife back and forth. James, can I tell you something? Will you promise not to get mad? Lily asked, looking into her husband's eyes. James nodded. Do you remember when I went missing for several days after we got married? Another nod. Well, I wasn't at my sister's baby shower. I'd been kidnapped by Death Eaters, Lily whispered. James looked at her in shock. They did horrible things to me, Jim. They beat me, and cursed me, but on the night before I was rescued, one of them beat me. Severus Snape found me, and got me out soon after. A few weeks later I found out I was pregnant. I wasn't sure if you were the father, or if it was the Death Eater. When he was born, we ran a test, and he wasn't yours, Lily whispered, latching on to the front of Jim's nightshirt. Jim just kept rocking his wife, petting her hair and offering her comfort. Dumbledore said it would be in the best interest of myself and the baby if I put him up for adoption. I was scared, and I didn't know how you would respond, so I agreed. He placed him with his friends, Alex and Emma Keller. When he was 5 they were targeted and killed by Voldemort. It had happened so fast they hadn't even been able to scream. They just swept through and killed all of them, Lily sobbed. James just stared ahead of him in shock. Of all the things he'd thought she'd say, this wasn't it. Come to think of it, Jim realized how pale she had been at the topic of the Kellers. Vowing to speak with Dumbledore in the morning, Jim rocked his wife until she cried herself into a deep sleep. Tessa, it's time to wake up, James whispered, tickling his girlfriend with a newly conjured feather. It's too early, James. Leave me be, Triss groaned, pulling her pillow over her head. Come on, Triss, it's a new day and you need to go face the world, James whispered, giving Triss a lingering key on the neck. She turned to face him, and with no warning, shoved him off the bed. Blowing him a raspberry, Triss pulled the blankets up to her chin and pulled the pillow back over her head. Glaring at the lump in the bed, James snapped his fingers, and the blankets and pillows disappeared. Grr. James. I really don't like you, Triss groaned, easing herself up. Madame Pomfrey ordered that you get up and move around. She said it'll make your stomach feel better, and you need to take this. It'll remove any lingering pain, and heal anything else that's still damaged, said James, producing a pale pink potion. Triss nodded, and downed the potion in one gulp. With James's help, Triss stood, and dressed in a loose dress Madame Pomfrey provided. After a while of walking, the two of them reached the dorms, where Triss took a long shower, and dressed in clean clothes. That feels so much better, said Triss, pulling her long hair into a ponytail. I'm sure. But Triss, I have a question, and I want you to answer truthfully. Are you okay? James asked, sitting her down on his bed. In all honesty, I don't know. I'm really confused. At first, I really didn't want a baby, but the more I thought on it, the more I warmed up to the idea. Now that there is no baby, I'm just confused, Triss admitted. How so? James asked. Well, it's like hearing about a murder on the Muggle news. You feel bad about it, but there's nothing you can do, so you kind of just let it go. Our baby was alive, sure enough, but it was barley formed, little for then nerves and things like that, so it's just kind of unreal, Triss explained. James nodded. He understood, sort of. I can sort of see what you mean. I'll tell you what, it's Hogsmeade weekend, so let's go down and we'll go shopping and get some lunch, James suggested. Sounds like a good idea, said Triss, nodding. At that moment, Draco burst through the door, holding something. A few nights after the ball, the gang had gotten together and discussed what was going on with Draco, and all came to the decision that it was safer for him if they kept a distance, and also revert back to formal first names. I don't think you guys want to go upstairs, Draco gasped, shoving a paper into James's hand. The headline was in dark bold letters, reading, Champion 4 threatens headmaster and assaults potions master. Under the title of the story was the name Rita Skeeter. Oh no, James groaned. In the center of the page was a blown-up picture of Snape's black eye. How bad is it upstairs? James asked. Well, most of the Griffs are hailing you for hitting Sev, but a lot are freaked because you threatened the headmaster. It's not every day you see Albus Dumbledore backed into a corner by a student, Draco commented. Yeah, but no one else was in that hallway, Triss commented. Unless Skeeter is an unregistered animagus, said James. I say you need to go speak to the minister that is held so tightly under your thumb, Draco suggested. James nodded. Come on. No better time than the present, said James, pulling Triss out of the dorm and into the common room. Even with all of the students in the room, no one commented on Triss being in the boys' dorm, as it was no secret that she and James were involved in every aspect of the word. Upon entering the Great Hall, all talking stopped. Spotting the minister, James yelled, Cornelius, we need to speak to you, before turning and exiting the hall as fast as he'd come in. Less than a minute later, Fudge appeared. What the devil have you gotten yourself into this time cage? It seems we have an unregistered animagus in our hands. One Rita Skeeter is spying on people in her form. I'm guessing it to have been very small. An insect maybe. It's my suggestion that we do something about her. There is no other way she could have seen or heard any of what went on in the hall yesterday, said James. Really? I'll look into it. However, do us all a favor and hit Snape again, snarky bastard that he is. Rita Skeeter, under arrest for being an unregistered animagus, was the headline the next morning. That was fast, James muttered, showing Triss the paper. Look here, they caught her in a set-up classified conference late last night. Well, it seems Fudge is our new best friend, said Triss, speed reading the paper. Yeah, it's kind of weird, all the people who didn't like me are starting to be my best buddies, and people who did are becoming a pain in the ass. James asked. I don't know. Has there been any word on Dragon? Triss asked, folding the newspaper. James shook his head in the negative. No, if there had been, Jewel would have contacted me. It seems there have been several disappearances in the past few weeks, no bodies though, said James. Do you think this could have something to do with the Voldemort rumors? Triss asked. James shrugged. It's possible, but unlikely. I would have picked up on at least a flicker of something if he had any power, regardless of the fact that my powers are being wacky. You would have picked up on it too, James pointed out. Triss nodded. So, are you guys ready to go for the Yule Ball? Rome asked, sitting down across from the two. Yes. We got dress robes before we came to school, said Triss. They were on the list, James added. Jin, are you still going with Draco? He asked. Ginny nodded, tossing a look to Draco, who was stuck sitting between two gorilla-like boys looking utterly bored. Across from him was a pug-faced girl smiling coyly at him. Draco looked at her with nothing less than complete disgust. Turning back to James, Triss saw his image flicker out of the corner of her eye. Looking at him fully, she saw a look of intense concentration on his face. Are you all right? She asked, switching over to Elven as easily as he switched to Parseltongue. It's getting harder to hold every day. I don't know how much long it's going to be before everything shuts down, James growled. His eyes flickered to their natural emerald green for a moment, before righting themselves. Placing a hand on his temple, he cemented the image into place as well as he could. Triss didn't miss the look of pain that crossed his face, nor did Severus and Potter. It has to be a glitch, or something in the air. You'll be fine, said Triss, more to reassure herself than him. Damn straight. Can't very well keep the twins out of trouble if I'm incapacitated, James said with a grin. Again, Triss didn't fail to notice how he didn't have his arm wrapped around her waist or shoulders as he normally did. It had become apparent to her very quickly that he was more affectionate, but not as intimate as he had been before. Triss didn't like that, but didn't say anything, at least for the time being. I can see your point, but sometimes I think it's the twins keeping you out of trouble, Triss commented, taking a large sip of fruit smoothie. James mock glared at her. No, that's your job, he said, somehow managing to keep a straight face. Well, now that you have admitted I have full power over you, I must tell you that if we are not to be late for Evan's class, we have to leave now, said Triss, pulling James from his seat. Yes, master, he said, following Triss at the heels like a lost puppy dog. He is Sue-whipped, Rome said, wrapping an arm around his girlfriend as they left the hall to go to their morning classes. Like you aren't, Mel said under her breath as she and Vlad followed them. In charms, Evans couldn't even look Triss in the eyes, and hardly managed it with James. While James was downright furious, Triss was only angry. She could feel the guilt radiating off of Evans, and couldn't help but feel a bit bad. The woman had enough baggage to carry, having lost several of her own children, and didn't need that of another, even if it was partly her fault. It was all Triss could do to stop James from releasing a bit of stress on the teacher. After explaining her point of view over the teacher, he agreed, and redirected his fury to the one at the top of the chain, Albus Dumbledore. Triss couldn't bring herself to feel anything but pure fury towards her grandfather. If she had her way, he would be rotting in the dungeons by now. She had yet to be told the great story of James's threat to Dumbledore, in James's words anyway. Time went by quickly. The Yule Ball went by with relative ease, if you don't count Rome getting into a fistfight, and winning, against Victor Crumb, for grabbing Cat inappropriately. Fred and George went with Alicia Spinnet and Katie Bell, their longtime girlfriends. James ended up dancing with just about every girl at the dance, but danced with Triss the most. For reasons unknown to even James, Dumbledore went around sporting a black eye for almost 2 weeks. Triss swore it hadn't been her, so James could only imagine what had happened. A small talk with James Potter anyone. The third task came and went with ease as well. James walked away with little more than a dislocated shoulder from being tossed into the wall by Irish lightning bolt, the second most dangerous dragon in the world, second only to the Hungarian horntail, deemed too dangerous to be used in the tournament. As of the third task, James had collected 3 of the weird medallions. It was only by fluke that Triss figured out that the 3 fit together, and were missing only one more piece. This was in late March. In late April, it was announced that Evans was once again expecting. It was too early to tell whether it was to be a boy or a girl, but James had the feeling it was to be a boy. Snape, while still his bastard self, had toned down a little, his way of giving James an apology. By May, James and Triss's relationship was back to normal, though she wasn't staying in his room as often as before. Kat had had a minor pregnancy scare, but was assured by both James and Triss that she had nothing to worry about. This, however, gained her and Rome a very long lecture from Draco, James, Severus, Remus and Sirius, both of whom had been visiting the school very often. Dragon was still missing, along with several more wizards and witches. James and Triss were both very worried about their mentor, but weren't allowed to leave the school because of the tournament, otherwise both would have been out searching for him, regardless of the turnout of their last meeting. All too soon, it was time for the 4th and final part of the tournament. James had been informed by Fudge to be out at the Quidditch pitch by no later than 8 p.m., only minutes before the scent was to set. Are you sure you feel up to this? Triss asked, one final time as James pulled on a plain white shirt. As he thought it would be easier to move around without his robes, James had opted to dress only in a pair of old carpenter jeans, steel-toes work boots, and a t-shirt. Tessa, I already told you, I'm fine. I know I'm having a few problems holding my images, but it's nothing to be worried about. It's been going on since November, and I'm still doing fine. In fact, I think I'm starting to get better. It's not as hard as it was, say, in April, James responded, giving his soul bond a light key on the temple. All right, but if you have any trouble in the tournament, don't hesitate to get out of there. Jewel isn't around to keep you out of trouble at the moment, Triss warned. James grinned at her. You have your wand, right? No, Triss. I left it sitting under my bed, James responded sarcastically. Ass. Well, let's go then, said Triss, heading up to the main hall for dinner before the tournament. In the middle of the meal, Potter came over to the table. Mr. Cage, have you seen Lizzie? She's supposed to sit with her aunt during the tournament, and I can't find her, Potter said, mild concern crossing his features. I haven't seen her since noon. I think she's playing with some of the first-year Ravenclaws. I wouldn't worry about it, the girl can hold her own, said James. He left out the fact that he had provided her with a temporary wand via Ollivander and had been teaching her spells. Thanks, said Potter, a bit of relief crossing his features. He quickly returned to the head table, ready escorting his slightly showing wife to the pitch no doubt. I'm going to go ahead and get out there. I'll see you in the aftermath of all of this, said James, giving Triss a small peck before heading out the door. As it was very near 8, James was the last of the champions to leave. Triss was quick to join the rest of the spectators in the stands. The usher, for some reason unknown to Triss, sat her right down next to Evans and the twin Potters. The elder Potter was patrolling the pitch should any of the champions need assistance. Evans made a point not to look at the younger woman, but Triss would have none of it. Did you ever find Lizzie, Professor? Triss asked. No, Jim and I figured she just decided to go sit with her friends. I can only imagine how boring it must be to only be able to hang out with people much older or much younger than herself. I should think it'll be easier for her next year, Evans said, her voice a little stiff. What house do you think she'll be in? Triss asked. Evans looked at her strangely. Lizzie isn't a witch, Evans said, her voice now holding a confused tone. I don't think so. James has been teaching her, and I've seen her pull a spell or two, Triss said, thinking back on the powerful unlocking charms she'd seen from the younger girl. I'll have to look into that, Evans said, turning her attention to the starting tournament. All right, do all of you have the pendants you collected over the past few months? Fudge asked. The 4 champions held up the pendants. Only James's and Cedric Diggory's were connected. Fudge went through a quick lesson on how to connect them, taking a point off of Crumb and Fleur for not having figured it out. Now that everyone is on the same page, you have to find the last piece of the puzzle. Mr. Cage, your piece will be white, Mr. Diggory, your piece will be yellow, Mr. Crumb, your piece will be red, and Ms. Delacour, your piece is to be pink. Each of you will start out in a different part of a maze. Once you find your piece, connect it to the others, and you will be transported to the next stage, the same setup as the first, a maze. Your goal in the next stage is to get the cup before anyone else. Good luck to you all, said Fudge. Seconds later, James was standing in his own separate box at the start of the maze. He took a big breath and ran a scan on his power level. It was just as low as it had been before. A small amount of dizziness swept over him. Maybe I should have listened to Triss and backed out, James thought, catching himself on the side of the box. Shaking it off, James was ready to go just in time for the starting bell. Pulling his wand, James cautiously walked out of the box. Walking as fast as his feet would permit, James followed the twists and turns until he came to a cross-section. Point me, said James, holding out his wand. It pointed to the path to his right. Turning onto the path, he hadn't gotten more than 10 feet before he ran smack dab into Cedric. Having any luck? Seed asked. None. I haven't even run into a bloody obstacle yet, James responded. I think this is the obstacle course until we get to the next round, Cedric said before turning and running down the path, away from where James was going. 15 minutes and no monsters later, James finally found what he'd been looking for. Interlocking the white piece with the others, James felt a slight tug before he was dropped into the beginning of another maze. Fantastic, James groaned. It wasn't very long before he reached the first obstacle, a rather pissed off black mamba. Let me pass, James commanded. The snake looked at him in defiance, before finally backing down at the determined look in James's eyes. After that, he came to a 3-way interchange. Point me, he said for the second time that night. His wand spun to point to the path to his left. After 5 minutes of running, he narrowly missed a spell from a jumpy Fleur Delacour. James glared at her, looking at his singed pant leg before continuing on. Not too long later, James came to his next obstacle. A giant lioness stood in his way. Dear lady, I beg you to grant me access to the rest of my journey, James said, bowing. I will let you move on, as I did the others, if you can answer me this. Alive without breath, as cold as death, never thirsty, ever drinking. All in male, never clinking. A.N. A.J.R.R. Tolkien. James knew the answer immediately. Since his first year, he had made an oath to himself to read the Lord of the Rings series at least once every year. The Hobbit was his favorite. A fish, he said easily. Very well. I bid you good luck. You will need it, the lioness said, moving enough that James could pass. James continued on his way. After several more minutes of running, James nearly jumped out of his skin when two loud screams echoed through the air. Picking up speed, he whipped around a corner to see Fleur and Cedric writhing on the ground under the wand of Victor Crumb. Reducto! James shouted, pointed at Victor's feet. The ground exploded, sending Victor hurtling through the air and through one of the bush that made one wall of the maze. Are you two all right? James asked, pulling the two off of the ground. Fine, Cedric answered, shakily pulling himself to his feet. Fleur tried to stand as well, but found herself unable. Just lie down, Fleur. Cedric, are you still up to continuing? James asked. Yeah, should I hail someone? Cedric asked. James nodded and checked Fleur over for any nerve damage. The curse hadn't been held very long, but he wanted to check anyway. While James did this, Cedric pointed his wand straight up and muttered an incantation, shooting red sparks into the air. Come on, they're both still alive. Crumb isn't in the best of states, but he's alive, said James. What about Fleur? Cedric asked. Fine. No nerve damage, and no small cuts or anything. Aside from that small cut on your forehead, you're fine too, said James, motioning to the before unseen cut. How do you know that? Cedric asked. My secret, James responded before taking off down one of the paths, leaving Cedric to take his own way. Less than 15 minutes later, James came to what only could have been the last obstacle. Sitting in the center of the path was a spider. A very large spider. James had his claws out within seconds. He knew this type of spider, the ones from the forest. They weren't the friendliest bunch. The spider hissed and jumped at him, but James was no longer anywhere near that point. Back down now, or I will have to kill you, James said. He knew very well that these spiders understood English. Unsurprisingly, the spider just jumped at him again, catching his leg and tossing him further down the path. F.K. this, James said, pulling his wand. Decalo. A.N. A. Sari Snape. The spider's head rolled to the ground, leaving the body dead. Easing himself up, James surveyed the damage on his leg. Medicor, he muttered, point his wand at his leg. It closed up enough from him to be able to walk, but not enough to stop it from bleeding. Stupid F. King spiders, James muttered, continuing on. Finally, he reached a large, open area. In the center was a large, golden cup. The thing James noticed, however, was Cedric, and the lioness chasing him. Stop! James yelled. The lioness turned to him. Badger Child was unable to answer my riddle. I must kill him, the lioness growled. What was the riddle? James asked, as Cedric stood behind him. What has roots as nobody sees? Is taller than the trees? Up it goes. And yet it never grows. The lioness asked. A mountain, James responded. The lioness nodded. You have solved the riddle for the Badger Child. You are both free to proceed, she said, return from the path she started. I owe you for that one, Cedric breathed, relieved that he wasn't to become cat food. No big. I ran into her too. Both of her riddles were from a muggle book I read in first year, said James, turning back. Go ahead and take the cup. You got here first, said James, leaning against the hedge wall. No way. If it weren't for you, I'd be getting picked out of a lion's teeth at the moment, said Cedric. I'm not taking the damn thing. I don't want it. I don't need the fame, or money. I have more money than I know what to do with right now anyway, said James. Fine. We'll take it together. It'll still be a win for Hogwarts, and we'll be totally even, said Cedric. James thought on it. Cedric was a Hufflepuff, There was no doubt that he would sit there and wait until either James took it by himself, or with Cedric. Fine, said James, moving towards the cup. On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. James shouted. Both boys grabbed the cup, to be hit with a tugging sensation. Seconds later they were dropped on the ground. The ground was soft and wet, and the air smelled stale and wet. What the F? K? James asked, helping Cedric to his feet. Think this is another part of the tournament they didn't tell us about? Cedric asked, slipping his wand away, unseen by James. I don't know. I doubt it. Someone rigged the cup, said James, looking down at the gold cup sitting on the ground. James was about to reach down for the cup, when a hair-raising voice yelled, Kill the spare. Avada Kedavra. No, James yelled. The curse was heading towards Cedric, so James did the best he could on such short notice. He jumped in front of the older boy. The curse struck James in the side, more or less blowing a small hole at the impact point, making walking almost impossible, and blowing his shift, sending him back to his normal appearance. Cedric stared at him in horror. Oh my go. He never finished the sentence, as James levitated the cup into the older boy's hands. Tell Triss I love her, James whispered before Cedric disappeared, leaving James alone and wounded. Unable to do much else, James dropped to the ground, ready to face his fate, whatever that might be. Wormtail, collect the boy. A voice James recognized as Voldemort yelled. James felt himself being levitated, but didn't have the willpower to open his eyes. Is he dead, Master? Wormtail asked, setting the boy down at Voldemort's feet. Dead? Of course not. I left the boy enough power to block a little curse like that, Voldemort sneered. Forcing one eye open, James looked at the man above him, and was surprised to find that Voldemort had a body. Everything clicked in James's mind all at once. Voldemort had been draining his power so he could have his body back. That's why James hadn't quite been himself for a while. It was brilliant, but James was sure Voldemort had forgotten one thing: he never blocked James from locking up his powers. Working as quickly as his draining powers would permit, James dropped into a state of limbo, and started pulling triggers in his magic, stopping Voldemort from absorbing his power, and reversing the process. If all went well, Voldemort would be powerless in minutes. Give me your arm, Wormtail, Voldemort commanded. Wormtail held out his arm to have it roughly grabbed by Voldemort, his finger pressed into the dark mark on his arm. James drifted off after that, floating in nothingness for several minutes until he felt a strong kick on his side, rolling him onto his back. Well, Cage, how does it feel to be on the receiving end? Voldemort asked. Standing all around were figures dressed in black robes. One of them held something that made his heart nearly stop. Tied to a tombstone was Elizabeth, pale with fear and trembling. James wasn't sure she recognized him, but he was going to protect her if needed regardless of what he looked like at the moment. Go F.K. yourself, Tom. You no longer have control over my powers, link or none, James growled, turning back to Voldemort. Right on time, Voldemort let out a defining scream. What did you do? Voldemort yelled, holding his head. I took back something that wasn't yours to start with, James said, shakily pushing himself to his feet. As his powers were currently locked up, he had no advantage over the 20 or so Death Eaters that stood around him. 2 of them he knew to be Lucius and Severus, both of which were standing rather stiffly. James turned to face Voldemort. No longer was there a normal-looking man. What now stood could only be called a monster. His face was pale and hollow, and his eyes were bright red. Pulling out his wand, he commanded every Death Eater to do the same. All at once they yelled, Crucio. James could do nothing but scream as fire erupted from his blood, baking his bones and turning his flesh into ashes. Cedric. What happened? Potter asked, pulling the young man from where he'd fallen on the ground. He killed him, Cedric stuttered, the cup still held tightly in his hand. Who killed who, Cedric? Potter demanded. Cedric shook his head. I don't know. He fired the killing curse at me, and James jumped in front of me, and shoved me onto the cup. It was a portkey, Cedric said, holding up the cup, careful not to let Potter touch it. Potter swore quite colorfully, shooting sparks into the air to call for backup. Within minutes the maze was gone, leaving Cedric and Potter in the open of the pitch. What happened? Dumbledore asked, jogging up to the two. The man, he killed him. He jumped in front of the curse to save me. He changed though. After the curse hit, his eyes changed colors, and his hair too. Cedric said. He told me to tell Triss that he loved her, Cedric whispered. Professor. He said the cup was a portkey, Potter said, motioning to the cup in Cedric's hand. Dumbledore easily removed it from the boy's hand, casting a spell to render it inactive. Jim, take Mr. Diggory to the infirmary. He seems to be suffering from the after effects of the Cruciatus curse, much like Ms. Delacour. Professor Moody, please get me Tristessa Summers, Dumbledore ordered, pointing to both teachers respectively. A few minutes later Triss nearly ran into Dumbledore, Moody several feet behind. What happened, Albus? Where's James? Triss demanded. I was hoping you could tell me. The both of you always seem to be at least one step ahead of everyone else, Dumbledore said, rubbing his temples. Albus, if I know where he was I wouldn't be asking you. I can't even get a bond trace on him. It's like his presence is totally fizzled out, but he's still live, Triss shouted, drawing a lot of attention to herself. Dumbledore nodded solemnly. Fudge made his way over. Dumbledore, what's going on? He asked. Mr. Cage is missing. The cup was a portkey. I'm going to have it traced as soon as possible. Mr. Diggory said Mr. Cage took a killing curse in his place, but didn't die immediately, and Ms. Summers says she believes him to still be in the land of the living, Dumbledore explained, looking older with every word. Killing curse. Why the F? K didn't you tell me? Triss demanded. I didn't want to upset you by letting you know that Mr. Cage is most likely dead, Dumbledore said solemnly. Triss shook her head in the negative. Remember when he showed you he was immune to the Cruciatus curse? Triss asked. Dumbledore nodded. It wasn't just that curse. Any curse with intent to deeply harm or kill him, he can block to an extent. 1 or 2 killing curses are nothing more than a mild stunner to him, if that. However, his energy will only hold out for so long, said Triss. What about his eyes and hair? Mr. Diggory said they changed color after he was hit by the curse, Dumbledore pointed out. Triss shook her head. I can't tell you. Let's just say it has a lot to do with Voldemort looking for him. Although, James's change in appearance didn't seem to help much, Triss muttered the last part mostly to herself. It was quite a while later that James finally felt the curses and beatings stop. He was trying to store enough usable energy that he could get himself and Lizzie out, and that was if his powers cooperated. As it was, he was going to have to temporarily take down the block to do that, something Voldemort would defiantly feel. To all of the wizards gathered around him, James seemed to have passed out or died, not that many could see his eyes because of his blood-caked hair being in the way. Voldemort seemed to be fooled as well. Lizzie was still tied to the stone, her eyes wide with fear and horror, trained completely on James's unmoving form. With a twitch, James kept his ears open, listening to Voldemort lecture the group on how they all betrayed him, and listened to them all take their turns screaming as Voldemort cast the Cruciatus curse on each of them. Along with the screams, James heard rustling just to the right of him, where Lizzie was. Since the Death Eaters were temporarily finished with James, they relocated to several feet to his left, leaving he, Lizzie and a certain rat alone. Turning his head enough to get a full view of his younger cousin, James was nearly sick all over himself from what he saw. Wormtail had unbound the little girl from the stone, laying her out on the ground, still bound. As she struggled, Wormtail straddled the little girl, groping her in places that she shouldn't be touched by anyone less than her husband. As James couldn't hear Lizzie's cries, he figured Wormtail had cast some sort of silencing charm. Pulling whatever energy he had gathered together, James silently pushed himself to his feet. In his fury he nearly jumped when his claws popped out. After not having used them in nearly a year, James had forgotten about them. Anyone who had been watching would have seen James blur as he rammed into Wormtail, knocking him off of the crying Lizzie, and pushing his titanium claws through the rat's chest. Whatever charm Wormtail had cast over the area was broken, and Lizzie's crying became audible, as well as the rattling of Wormtail's last few breaths. Rot in hell, you mother F. Cur, James hissed, spitting on the body, as he used what was left of his strength to make his way to his cousin. The group of Death Eaters watched in nothing less than amazement as the teenager killed one of their rank, even the lower rank, in his condition. Most people would have been dead or severely injured after being held under the Cruciatus curse for so long, plus being beaten and tortured with several other curses, but there James was, crawling towards the crying little girl. James had hardly reached the girl when he felt himself tossed recklessly into an angle headstone, breaking it in half. Several seconds later he found himself staring up at Voldemort, whom was pointing his wand down at the teenager. Impressive, Cage. If you're this much fun every time we torture you, you may just live for a while, Voldemort said, grinning malevolently at James. Avery, take them both down to the dungeons. Do not touch either of them, Voldemort hissed, pointing to James and Lizzie. Avery cast a stretcher charm on James, and grabbed Lizzie roughly by the arm after undoing the bonds holding her feet, and took them both to a large, spooky-looking house not far from the graveyard. Jim. Albus. Lily yelled, bursting into Dumbledore's office. Sitting around the room was Tris, Dumbledore, Potter, Fudge, McGonagall, Sirius, Remus, Libby An. James's aunt, Dragon's sister, Tonks, and a few other Aurors. It had been a little over 2.5 hours since James disappeared, and they were waiting on feedback from some of the contacts they had, mainly Snape and Lucius. Lily, you shouldn't be running around the castle in your, Potter started, only to be cut off. Lizzie is gone, she stated simply, hysteria in her voice. What do you mean, Lily? Dumbledore asked, standing from the seat behind his desk. Lily looked ready to start screaming at him. I mean, she is gone. All of her friends said the last time they saw her was when she left to find me, and she never did. No one has seen her since before dinner. Lily cried. Are you sure she isn't just hanging out? Potter started, only to be cut off again. Yes, I'm sure. I asked everyone. I even tried a minor tracking charm. She isn't here. Shit, was all Tris had to say. She had a growing bad feeling growing in her stomach, and she knew with unexplainable certainty that James and Voldemort were right in the middle of it all. I'll go inform the rest of the team and have them search the grounds, said an Auror named Shacklebolt, who was looking rather uncomfortable. He left the room, Remus and Sirius glaring holes into his back the whole way. I need to go inform a few people about what's going on. I'll be back in a little while, said Tris, excusing herself from the room. Whatever protection James had put up in her mind to tone down her empathic abilities was long gone, and all of the feeling in the room was giving her a huge migraine. Damn it, James, you better be okay, Tris said to herself, jogging up the stairs to Griff Tower. James was only half conscious when he felt himself dropped on a cold, stone floor. Lizzie was dropped next to him, with the rest of her bonds cut. With much effort, James managed to push himself into a sitting position against one of the stone walls. Looking around, he was surprised to see he wasn't the only one, besides Lizzie, in the cell. Sitting near the opening of the cell was a very familiar face. Dragon, James breathed, hardly able to talk. His throat was raw from screaming, and James knew it was only a matter of time before he couldn't talk at all. Dragon didn't seem to be in the best of shape either. He had a dark purple rim around his right eye, contrasting greatly with his pale skin and hollow cheeks. He also seemed to have lost a lot of weight. James was sure that he could see every bone through his skin. The older man's hair was now more gray than black, and one of his legs seemed to be resting at an odd angle. If James hadn't been able to see the rising and falling of the man's chest, he would have, though he was dead. He didn't react at all when James called his name again. Are you all right? Lizzie asked, drawing his attention away from the older man. I'm fine. Do you know who I am? James asked, still wondering if the girl recognized him. Yes. You're James Cage, and you saved my life again. Are you absolutely sure you're okay? Lizzie asked again. James nodded. Lizzie looked skeptical. Seriously, I'm fine. It looks worse than it is, James lied. If anything, it was worse than it looked, and it looked really bad. Liz, do you still have that wand I gave you? James asked. Yeah, they never though to check for it. Everyone still thinks I'm a muggle, Lizzie growled sourly. She really didn't like being thought of being what she wasn't. Excellent. Give it to me, we're getting out of here, said James, pushing himself to his feet. Lizzie handed the wand to him, and helped him the best she could as he tossed Dragon over his shoulder. Do you think there is anyone else in here? James asked, looking around the dungeon to the best of his ability. No, this is the only cell here. I saw on my way down, said Lizzie. James nodded, hoping she was right, though he doubted anyone who had been brought here was still among the living. Liz, hold on to the wand, tightly. Ready? James asked. Lizzie nodded. There's no place like home. With that, the three people disappeared. And reappeared in none other than Dumbledore's office. Upon landing, James stumbled under Dragon's weight. He dropped Lizzie's wand, stabling himself. The only people that were still in the room after meeting with Dumbledore were Lily, Potter, Tris and Dumbledore himself. A little help would be nice, James growled, stumbling under Dragon's weight again. Lizzie and Tris both acted, helping James lower the older man to the floor. Everyone else seemed to be frozen. Lily, Potter and Dumbledore were all looking at him in slight horror, whether it was because of his appearance or the blood and bruises that now graced his body. God, James, what happened? Tris demanded, checking Dragon's weak vitals. I'm not sure. We found him in the dungeons of the old Riddle house. He didn't respond to me, said James, swaying a little on his feet. Lizzie was doing her best to stable him, but gladly allowed Potter to take over after he'd snapped out of his shock. Sit down, Mr. Cage, said Potter said, sitting James down in a chair. Lily also snapped out of her stupor. It's him, she half said, half giggled before dropping in a dead faint. F.K., said James, resting his head in his hands, blowing a stray strand of his now shoulder-length hair out of his eyes. During all of this, Dumbledore had whispered several spells, sending messages to several different people. It was only minutes before Poppy made an appearance, whisking Dragon and Lily away, James Potter in tow. Lizzie had opted to stay, saying she was fine with the exception of a small cut above her left eye. James still had his head resting on his hands, his hair hiding his face. Tris took a seat next to James, fighting the urge to drag him off to the hospital wing. Just by resting her hand on his back she could feel the spasms of his muscles, an after-effect of the Cruciatus curse, something he shouldn't have been affected by. A few minutes after that, Sirius and Remus made their way into the office, carrying a rather beat-up Snape between them. Sirius and Remus set their old classmate down in one of the chairs before sitting down themselves. Now that everyone is here, do you mind explaining what happened? Dumbledore asked James. James sighed, and sat up, pushing his hair out of his face. Everyone who wasn't used to this form of him was shocked. Gone were the soft, rounded features of the James Cage they were used to. James's features were now much sharper, and more defined, a customary trait of the Snape family. His nose was, like his face, very sharp, and defined, but lacked the customary hook. His eyes had changed from their normal blue, to stunning emerald green, accenting his long, dark hair. Very well, said James. For some reason, he'd known he was going to have to tell all of them the truth since he'd met them. When I was born I was adopted by Alex and Emma Keller. At the age of 5, our house was attacked. They killed my dad right off the bat, and they started torturing my mother. I wasn't going to have that, and I jumped on them. Sometime in the middle of all of that, they killed my mom, and I took out Peter Pettigrew's eye, James explained. So that's what you meant when you asked Peter if he was still sore about his eye in the shack, said Sirius. He had been wondering about that comment for years. Yeah, after I took out Peter, Voldemort came after me, fired a killing curse at me, but it bounced off my shields, killed him or as close to killed him as possible. The impact of everything set my house on fire, and I somehow managed to get myself to Dragon's house, the man that came here with me. He explained to me about the power that I have, James continued. What powers would those be? Dumbledore asked. Shapeshifting, will wizardry, elementalism, healing, porting, telepathy and parseltongue. I can also see magic as well as trace it. The problem is, I only have enough energy to use one of these powers to its full potential. Tris made a mental note to talk to Dragon about that in the future. After meeting Tris, and over my years here, I kept Voldemort at bay, and righted some of the wrongs that went along with his downfall, said James, tossing a look at Sirius. By the way, your rat is dead. Sirius looked at him in awe. When? How? He asked. I'm getting to that part. Anyway, I wasn't kidding when I said I didn't enter my name into the cup. I'm guessing it was a setup. In the middle of the fourth task, I came across Crumb holding Cedric and Fleur under the Cruciatus curse. He was under the Imperious curse, but I didn't have time to trace it, so I did the next best thing. I blasted him into the side of the maze. Fleur was too hurt to go on, so Cedric sent up sparks. Both of us went on our way, and met each other at the end of the maze. Cedric was being chased by the lioness, and after dealing with that, we decided to take the cup together. It was a portkey. When we landed, a spell was shot at Cedric, and I blocked it, and pushed him back onto the cup with a message for Triss if I didn't get back. After that, Voldemort told me that he was tapping my powers, and had used them to get his body back. I put a stop to that, and while he still has a body, he isn't as powerful as he could have been. Almost everything after that is a blur, up until I killed Peter, James continued, running a hand through his hair. He wasn't sure if he should tell them the real reason for going after Peter, as it would be embarrassing to Lizzie. Why did you kill Mr. Pettigrew, and how? Dumbledore asked. Sensing James's hesitation, Lizzie continued on with the story. Peter went after me while the others were busy. James used those claw things in his hands, and put them through Pettigrew's chest, Lizzie explained, motioning to the three knife-like mark coming from the knuckles of each hand. Through all of the blood, you could almost see the titanium ducts that the claws came out of. All I remember after that is finding Dragon, and using Lizzie's wand as a portkey to get us out, James finished. All through the story, James' voice had been scratchy and he'd had to clear his throat more than once. All Severus could do was stare at him in disbelief. Severus, have you something to add? Albus asked. Every Death Eater that arrived at the meeting tonight held him under the Cruciatus curse with Voldemort for bouts of at least 6 minutes each. The Dark Lord also let some of the lesser-brained Death Eaters at him. They beat him shitless. Lucius and I both thought he was dead after that display, Severus said, flinching at James's ruffled condition. Well, I'm not dead, but I know why my muscles aren't working, said James, trying to make a shaky fist. He wasn't able to. Triss had had enough. She could feel how far and above her soul bond had pushed himself, and knew that when the adrenaline of what had happened had worn off, he was going to crash and burn, and she really didn't want that to happen in Dumbledore's office. Guys, I'm sorry to spoil your conversation, but James is in need of serious medical attention, if no one could tell, Triss growled, daring anyone to contradict her. Dumbledore nodded, vowing to investigate further. Very well. I take it you won't be taking him to the hospital wing? Dumbledore asked. Triss nodded. I can work better without Poppy hovering over me. Plus, his body is going to be very sensitive to spells, something I would rather not risk. Have a good night, said Triss dismissively. Oh, don't tell anyone James is back. I have a feeling he has a card he wants to play, that he won't be able to if you reveal him. James nodded, but didn't say anything, his voice having failed him. Using Triss as a crutch, James was lead out of the office, Triss casting invisibility charms the whole way. I guess it's too much to hope that this night is over, Remus stated tiredly. Right, so let me get this straight. James not only killed Voldemort 10 years ago, but he has held him off since then. Tell me, how is it that Voldemort was draining James's powers? Sirius asked, trying to connect everything he'd been told. You saw the cut on his forehead, that was bleeding. Severus asked. They all nodded. It's the mark left by the killing curse Voldemort hit him with. They are linked through it, though James told me he had sealed it off. And how exactly would you know any of this, Severus? Remus asked. Well, in case all of you morons hadn't figured it out yet, James Cage is my son. What? Lily, you need to wake up now, Potter whispered into his wife's ear. Lily stirred a bit, before opening her eyes. I just had the strangest dream, Jim. I dreamed the fourth task came around and Lizzie and James Cage disappeared, only to reappear in Dumbledore's office, Lily whispered, a bit flustered. It wasn't a dream, Lils, though I'm not sure that kid was James Cage. He looked like Severus, Potter commented, trying to cheer his wife up a bit. My eyes though, Lily said with a slightly dreamy smile. A dark look crossed her eyes. I am going to kill them, she said aloud, dropping back into a dead faint, leaving Potter totally confused in the land of the waking. After being set onto a healing table by Triss, James was lost to the world of the living. He woke up early the next morning feeling the worst he'd ever felt in his life. Trying to sit up, James was stopped by a familiar warm weight on his right side, and a weight lying across his legs and stomach. Open his eyes so he could see fully. He found Triss curled up next to him, with Glacier, Triss's cat, and Jewel lying on his legs and abdomen. He was also no longer lying on the healing table, but in a bed in one of the extra compartments of his trunk. Tessa? James asked. His voice seemed to be working again, although it did hurt a little to talk. Go back to sleep, James, you're going to need it, said Triss softly. It seemed that she hadn't been asleep at his side, just lying with him. What time is it? James asked. If he felt that he could go back to sleep with no consequences, he would have, but he knew he had several things to be dealt with before he could relax. Barely 7 o'clock. Go back to sleep, Triss said again. I can't. Too much to do, James said, forcing himself to sit up. Just about every part of his body hurt, but that wasn't about to stop him. James, Triss growled, sitting up. Whether you want to admit it or not, you just got your ass royally kicked and you have been seriously injured, so you need to rest. Triss, if I can't relax, I can't rest, and right now, I have some things that need to be taken care of before I can relax, said James, standing from the bed. Reaching under the bed, he pulled out a small bin with a spare set of his clothes, jeans, boxers, a t-shirt, shoes and socks. I'll be right back, said James, walking towards the small bathroom attached to the bedroom. Triss was nearly spitting in anger and worry, but she knew as well as he did that he couldn't sleep when things had to be done. A few minutes later James returned, pulling his long raven hair into a ponytail, letting his green eyes show. You're not going to try and alter your appearance at all? Triss asked. No need. All of this is going to come out no matter what I do, so I might as well get used to this appearance, and this hair, said James. Triss had to admit, he looked nothing like the James she'd become so attached to, but she didn't think any differently of him. Where are we going first? Triss asked. If she couldn't make him rest, then she was damn sure going to follow him and make sure he didn't overexert himself. The hospital wing. You need to talk to Derek, said a new voice. Turning, Triss saw Jewel standing there in her human form. That's what I was thinking. Poppy might need a hand with him, said James. Between Jewel and Triss, they managed to get James to the hospital wing without him hurting himself. Entering the hospital wing was another thing altogether. They seemed to have walked in on an argument between Dumbledore, Potter, Snape, Evans, Sirius, Remus and a very sore-looking dragon. He could feel the silencing charm, but just walked right through it. You should have told me, Albus. Lily yelled, her face red with anger. Told you what, Lily? I didn't even know about James Cage's parentage until he appeared last night with your father and your niece. You know more than I do. Dumbledore shouted back. What about you, Severus? Potter asked, rounding on Snape. Don't look at me, Potter. I've known he was my son for years, but I've been under strict instruction not say anything about his mother, or other family, Severus responded. He seemed to be sporting yet another black eye, for what, the trio didn't know. So Severus, you say you've known who his mother is? Dumbledore asked. James decided to step in at that point, before it got out of hand. Yes, he's known since the end of first year, and he was under my direction not to say anything. So now that we are all on the same page, how much have you all figured out? James asked. Dragon was the one to answer. They know who your parents are, and that you are very gifted and brought about Voldemort's first downfall, he said. Okay, well, that's just about all you need to know. If you don't mind, I am in need of a talk with my grandfather, James said, a minor amount of anger in his voice. No, I think we all need to have a talk and figure out what is going on, Lily said, stepping forward. Blazing green eyes met blazing green, but James de-iced to back down first, as he didn't want his mother being too stressed with the baby on the way. Fine, we'll have a talk, but calm down before you lose another son, said James, giving Lily's belly a look. After everyone sat down and calmed down, James asked, "So, why didn't you inform anyone of your heritage upon arriving at the school?" Potter demanded. "Because I knew how you'd react, either with disbelief or rejection, and I wasn't going to deal with that," James said with a shrug. "How did you know you wouldn't be welcomed into the family?" Lily asked, her eyes still glaring daggers at him. Now James was starting to get angry. They were trying to play the blame game, and so far, everything was pointing to him. "Well, Mom, you gave me away only minutes out of the womb to people you didn't even know, then erased my existence. What was I supposed to think?" James demanded, his tone a little colder than he had intended it to be. "You should have at least said something. I don't know about you, but I really didn't appreciate having a student around me for so many years, and then on day find out that he is my son," Lily yelled. James now knew where his temper came from. "Well, whose fault is that?" James asked, perfectly calm. James hadn't even had time to react before he felt a strong stinging sensation on his cheek. "You will not speak to me like that, Harry James," Lily growled, after she had slapped him. James looked strangely at her for a second, then he realized that's what his name would have been had he been a Potter. "I'm sorry, but you have absolutely no claim over me whatsoever, so I can talk to you any way I like," James growled back, his anger finally starting to show. Potter now decided to step in. "You will not talk to anyone in this room like that. We are all your elders, and deserve your respect," he yelled, standing over James as if trying to intimidate him. James stood from his chair to his full height, a good 6 inches over Potter. His eyes glinted with anger. "Look, Potter, I didn't come here to fight with any of you. At this moment, I am still recovering from my little party with Voldemort. If anything, you should be dotting my shoes for returning Lizzie unharmed. However, I am not interested in that either. What I am interested in is how you plan on dealing with Voldemort and my appearance," James hissed. He was whispering, but his voice echoed around the room as if he had yelled. Potter sat back down, looking rather intimidated. "What do you mean your appearance?" Derek asked. For the time being, James pushed back his anger at the older man, for he knew that he was one of the few in the room he could trust unconditionally, but James vowed to have a talk with the man later. "Voldemort was draining my power through our link. I had to put up a block to keep him out, but it is blocking me out as well. It will be at least 6 months before I have the power to take down the block and keep him out at the same time. James' cage can disappear for a while, but that still leaves what I'm going to do about my education and coming back once I get my powers back in working order. I can't leave Triss here either. She and I are bonded. I can't stay far from her for very long, or it will drive us both insane. I need to know what you want me to do," James explained. Dumbledore looked intrigued. "Tell me, does your normal wizard magic still work?" he asked. James nodded. "Yes, with a wand. It doesn't come from the same pool of magic as everything else." "Why?" "I was thinking, how about you becoming a teaching assistant for a while? You could pose as Jim and Lily's long-lost son. We can say you are here for the final part of an apprenticeship. Then, when your powers come back no one will question it," Dumbledore suggested. The words were hardly out of his mouth when Evan stood from her seat. "No, I won't allow it. He is no son of mine, nor will he ever be," she growled with more venom than Jewel's fangs. With that, she stalked out of the infirmary, Potter in tow. "Ow, that stung," James growled sarcastically. In truth, it did hurt him, and quite a bit at that, but he was more than used to rejection. After all, he'd known his mother would reject him once the truth came out since he'd been told her name. James could see Dragon's reason for not telling James that he was Lily's father. Triss squeezed his hand reassuringly. She'd felt his sting of pain at Evans's words through their ever-strengthening bond. "Does anyone wish to hear my opinion?" Derek asked. James nodded. "How about you come as Severus's son? If what I've heard is true, he's mean enough that no one would dare question him, especially after a prized Slytherin's disappearance. As far as you sudden arrival, you started school early, and have finished, but your mother died just this year, and because you are still underage, you have to stay with your father for the year, said Dragon. Sounds like a plan, but what about Triss? I don't know about you, but I won't leave her in the dorms by herself. There are too many Death Eaters in Slytherin, willing or not. I won't risk her being taken because Voldemort thinks she would know my whereabouts, James said firmly. Dumbledore nodded. You can share a room off of Severus's quarters. This brings us to our next topic. Your temporary name, said Dumbledore. Damon. It's my middle name, the next name of the line, Severus answered. James nodded, thanking every deity he knew of that name was only temporary. One problem though, won't anyone think it's weird that I disappear every night, right after my boyfriend disappeared? Triss asked. What about you drop in on it as well? You are a metamorphagus, you can change your appearance to suit your needs, and they could say the real Triss Summers is grief-stricken, and is staying with her guardian for the time being. Though, if you do that, you both would have to come as apprentices, Derek said. Sounds good to me. What do you think, Tessa? James asked. Better than the first. What will we do for the time being though? Just chill around the school. Triss asked. No, you're coming home with me, said Derek. You haven't been back home in a very long time. Plus, it's safer than anywhere else, being in the Elven realm, a place that Voldemort cannot access. Sounds good. I take it we will be leaving today? Triss asked. Derek nodded, sitting up from the bed. Dumbledore tried to make him sit back down, but was shoved off. Using James as a support, Derek said, I will be taking my grandson, and soon-to-be granddaughter home now. Owl us when you want us. Portus. Derek yelled. With a bright flash, the three disappeared, along with all evidence that they were there to start with. Jim Potter slowly made his way up to Dumbledore's office, sporting a few more bruises than he'd had when he'd left the hospital wing. Entering, he saw Dumbledore sitting at his desk, deep in thought. So what is the plan? Jim asked. Dumbledore jumped at his voice, but calmed immediately. I'm not sure. Hagrid is going to try and enlist the Giants' help. I think Remus will be going to Romania for the werewolves. James Cage and Tristessa have gone to their home with Derek Evans. They are going to come back as teaching assistants next school year. James will be going as Snape's son. How is Lily taking all of this, by the way? Dumbledore asked. Not very well. I'm afraid she's going to lose this child as well, Jim said, running a hand through his unruly hair. Don't worry, Jim. She'll pull through. At this moment, I'm actually more worried about our current minister problem, said Dumbledore. What minister problem? Jim asked. I've just been informed the Fudge has been removed from office, replaced by Christopher Umbridge, said Dumbledore. You're kidding? Asked Jim. No, I'm not. That's why I'm sending Remus and Hagrid out of the country. I give it a few days before he issues a law about non-humans and Muggle-borns. As it is, we have been assigned a High Inquisitor for the upcoming school year, his wife I think, responded Dumbledore. The wizarding world is doomed. Ready to go back to school? James asked on the morning of September 1st. The summer had been uneventful. He, nor Triss, had gone anywhere. They just spent time with Dragon, as James fine-tuned his wand-using abilities and learned how to become an animagus, per Triss's request. While shifters weren't supposed to be able to become animagi, James and Triss were exceptions. The two had also gotten used to their new names. Triss's had been temporarily changed to Christina Spencer, while James's had changed to Damon Snape. Triss would be posing as James's fiancée, which wasn't that far from the truth. Triss rolled to face her soul bond. Not really, but all live. I'm really not comfortable with only Snape, Dumbledore, Evans, Poppy, Sirius, and Remus knowing who we really are. Everyone, even our friends, think you're dead, or worse, and think I've gone home with Dragon, said Triss. Don't worry, it'll be fine, it always is, said James, giving Triss a lingering key. The two were startled by a knock in their door. James, Triss, get up. It's 10, and you guys still have to get to the station. Derek's voice yelled. James and Triss both jumped up, throwing on clothes as they went. A few minutes later, they met Derek in the kitchen, Trunks, with their new initials, trailing behind them. Triss had already changed her appearance. Instead of being a redhead with blue eyes, she now had wavy blonde hair that came just to her shoulders, and alert blue-green eyes. She had kept her height, but filed out some, getting rid of her washboard abs, and opting for a thin, but strong appearance. You two ready? Derek asked. Yeah, we'll see you soon, Dragon, said James, giving Dragon a strong hug. After a very long talk between James and Dragon, everything was normal between them. Triss hugged Dragon as well, before wrapping an arm around James's waist before he apparated them away. They arrived at the station at 10:55, having had to walk from the apparition point several miles from the station. As a last-minute thought, James had conjured a small, platinum engagement ring for Triss the wear. They found a compartment fairly quickly, as very few people wanted a seat in the very back of the train. Did Dumbledore say if we had patrol? Triss asked. Yes, as we are the only supervisors on the train this year, James groaned. You're kidding? Asked Triss. James shook his head. Nope. Dragon said something about Dumbledore wanting to test our abilities on handling children. No worries, we can handle them. We have wands, and we know how to use them, said James. Right. Let's start now, shall we? I'll take the back of the train, you take the front. Meet back here in 15 minutes. Triss asked. Sure thing. See you in 15, said James, giving Triss a soft key on the cheek before heading down his section of the train. The train ride was totally uneventful. There had been no fights, no arguments, and no cursing each other, at least from what James and Triss saw in their once-an-hour checks. They were very grateful when they arrived at Hogwarts, bored out of their minds from the long train ride. They entered the hall with the students, James finding it rather hard not to just announce himself as being back right there and then. Many faces, especially those of his friends, were solemn. Kat and Jin looked like they hadn't stopped crying in days, while Mel looked particularly pissed off. Then her eyes fell on him, and a knowing glance passed between them. Giving the girl a wink, James walked up to the head table, hand in hand with Triss. After he'd sat down, he noticed the glares Jin and Dre were giving him. They were soon followed by those of George, Fred, Hermione, and Roman. James ignored them, knowing he'd explain it to them later, and surveyed the head table. Sitting at the opposite end of the table was Evans, followed by Potter, then the divination professor, Professor Vector, a woman James nor Triss could identify, Dumbledore, Severus, the ancient runes professor, the Muggle studies professor, Hagrid, the astronomy professor, James and Triss. Dumbledore stood and gave his customary welcoming speech, after the students had been sorted. The sorting hat, being its mysterious self, had given them a warning, but hadn't specified what it meant. When he stood, the hall went silent. Welcome everyone. Now that you are all fed and watered, let me make a few announcements. First, I would like to welcome Professor Snape's son, Damon Snape, and his lovely fiancée, Christina Spencer. Both will be teaching assistants this year, before they start university next fall, if not sooner. Before Dumbledore could finish, there was the sound of the unidentifiable woman clearing her throat. Examining the woman, James couldn't help but notice her uncanny resemblance to a frog. Almost everyone in the hall shot her a glare. No one interrupted Dumbledore, whether they liked the man or not. Most of the students were too shocked to even speculate on the fact that Snape had a son. Casting his own glare, Dumbledore continued. Also this year, we have been assigned a High Inquisitor, whom will also be serving as our defense against the dark arts teacher, Professor Umbridge. He was again cut off by the woman clearing her throat. If you don't mind, I have a few words, she said, not even waiting for Dumbledore's answer before she stood and started talking. About 5 minutes into her speech, James got bored, and with a little help from Triss, proceeded to make the woman croak like a frog. She didn't notice it, thanks to a little swish of Triss's wand, but the students did. With wave of James's wand, a spell was cast making Umbridge think the students were watching obediently, soaking up every word, instead of rolling on the floor with laughter. 15 minutes later, Umbridge sat down looking quite pleased with herself. Once all of the students had gathered themselves, James undid his spell, while Triss undid hers. Dumbledore shot them a look, but they both saw the approving twinkle in his eye. He didn't like the woman either. After that interesting speech from Professor Umbridge, I think you all are ready to retire. Prefects, please lead the students to their respective dormitories, said Dumbledore. Sniffling chuckles, the students left the hall, ready for bed in preparation for the next day's classes. Damon, Christina, I bid you good night. Severus will take you to your rooms, said Dumbledore. James nodded, not quite ready to retire. God knew that if he didn't go talk to his friends, the proverbial shit would hit the fan. Dad, we'll come down to your rooms later and you can show us where ours are. Chris and I want to explore a little, said James, almost choking at calling Severus Dad. It was very unfamiliar, even if they had gotten along for a very brief period of time and James had addressed him as such. Very well. Be to my rooms no later than 10:30, responded Severus, stalking out of the hall, robes bellowing the whole way. As the two started to follow what was left of the students, James noticed Umbridge's glare, cast directly at Tris. Looking closely, James spotted her two perfectly pointed ears showing for the world to see. Leaning over, James whispered, "Your ears are showing." He leaned back with a cat-like grin, and Tris, playing along, gave him a playful slap, blushing and very discreetly fixing her ears. Opening a secret passage to a meeting room that only a few people knew about, James and Tris weren't surprised to see the large group waiting for them, including Lizzie, sporting her brand new Ravenclaw robes. James still thought the look on Potter's face when he was told Lizzie was a witch was priceless. Hey guys, James said. You have a hell of a lot of explaining to do, Cage, Mel growled, glaring at him. The only ones that didn't seem to be too angry were Draco and Lizzie. Lizzie because she'd known about this whole thing from the start, and Draco because he'd probably pieced it together already. Everyone else looked like they would peel the flesh from his bones if only asked. I know. Giving you a very shortened version, Voldemort attacked me after the tournament. He'd been draining my powers for a while, and had grown a new body. I got my powers back, got my ass kicked, and rescued Lizzie and Dragon, after killing Pettigrew. At current moment, I can't use my powers, as I am not powerful enough to take them off of lockup without Voldemort taking them again. I should be back to myself before the end of the year though, James explained, making it short and to the point. Everyone didn't seem as mad anymore, but they all looked questioning. Why did you decide to come back though? You can't be totally safe here, said Jin. Because I need to keep an eye on everything. Think of it as my lifelong obligation. Before you ask, I didn't come back as myself because without my shifting ability, the truth would have to come out. Evans is in denial about my existence, so I figured it'd be best for everyone if I just said I was Severus' son, and left it simple, James explained. Whatever. Just remember, you owe us a lot of house points, Fred growled, his prankster twinkle going full speed ahead. James shook his head. Sorry, but Dumbledore didn't authorize us to give points. Fred and George glared at him, but more or less everyone was happy with his minimal explanation. Whatever. I need to go to bed. We have classes in the morning, said Kat, giving James a quick hug before leaving the room, Rome in tow. Everyone else agreed, and soon only James, Tris and Lizzie were left in the room. James, or should I say Damon, do you happen to know where the Ravenclaw common room is? And what the password is? She asked innocently. Don't I always? Kat walked into defense against the dark arts in slight apprehension. When she had gone through her books earlier that morning, she noticed that their Dada book was all theory, not really a spell book, like they'd been in the past. Rome had pointed it out to her when they'd first gotten them, but she'd been too busy worrying about James to really notice. Umbridge came into the room, wearing a disgustingly pink cardigan. Kat again noticed how much she looked like a toad. Welcome class. Please take out you books, she said in her sickly sweet voice. Along with their books, students took out their wands. Oh no, you won't be needing wands for class this year, Umbridge said. Every student in the room looked at her like she was insane. If we don't use our wands, how are we supposed to do the spell? Asked Ron Weasley. It's part of a ministry teaching method. If you learn the theory you will be able to cast the spell, Umbridge replied. Only for enthusiasts. Precisionists need to actually see the spell done, or they will not be able to do it, Kat spoke. Umbridge turned on her, glaring. Ms. Hermione Granger. Ah, yes, I've heard about you. The smartest witch in Hogwarts, and a mudblood to boot, Umbridge sneered. Kat's eyes widened at being called a mudblood. As Severus Snape's adopted daughter, it was something that hadn't happened since her 3rd year. You have no right to talk to her like that, Professor. She is the child of a very powerful pureblood, Roan growled, his half-werewolf side surfacing. Mr. Roman Lupin. A werewolf, like his father, scum of the earth if you ask me. Should be killed, all of them. Nevertheless, I suggest you keep your temper in check, or you'll be a cell in Azkaban fast than you can say lycanthropy, Umbridge threatened. Ron Weasley, whether he liked either of them or not, had had enough. You have no right to talk to either of them like that. You're no better than one of Voldemort's Death Eaters. He yelled, his face red with fury. Detention, was Umbridge's one-word response. She is such a bi.ch. Ginny yelled, after returning to her dorm after her first defense session. Mel nodded in agreement. Yeah, she is, but we can't do anything about it. If Fudge hadn't gotten canned for letting his heritage out, then we would have some pull, but it's her husband in office, so nothing can be done, yet anyway. I don't give it long before Voldemort attacks, and this whole thing is blown wide open, Mel commented, digging for her Transfiguration book. Jin shook her head. He won't. It'd be a stupid move and he knows it. He's going to wait until we are at our most vulnerable, said Jin. You know this how? Mel asked. I had him in my head for 9 months. Trust me, I know how the old bastard thinks, and it isn't pretty, Jin said with a shiver. What are you two up to? James asked, walking into the Gryffindor common room. As a teaching assistant, he could go in and out of the dorms as he pleased. Triss, if his guess was correct, was visiting with Jin and Mel in the Slytherin dorms. Fred and George looked up at him like kids with their hand caught in the cookie jar. We were, reviewing for our transfiguration test tomorrow. Yeah, what he said. James raised a skeptical eyebrow. Right, so who is the unfortunate victim? James asked, grinning. Luckily, no one else was in the common room to witness their exchange. Umbridge. The woman is such a bi.ch. She gave Ron a detention that disturbed him so bad he hasn't talked since he got back, and that was 2 days ago. Neville said he was hiding his hands when he was getting ready for classes this morning, said George, concern in his voice. What do you think she did? James asked, concerned for his fellow classmate. We don't know, but we'll make her life a living hell for it, Fred vowed. James nodded. Well, good luck. Let me know if you need any help. Chris. James called, looking for Triss. When he'd gone to the Slytherin dorms to find her, Mel and Jin said she'd never been there to start with. He was now in the process of searching the castle. Several minutes earlier he'd sent Jewel down to their rooms to bring him their map, but she had yet to return. Turning a corner, James was nearly pushed over when a body ran full force into his. Looking down he saw Triss's new mass of blonde hair. Chris. James asked, using her alias unless someone was around. Damon. She asked, looking up into his brilliant green eyes. Something has to be done about that damn Umbridge woman. She intercepted me in the hallway and proceeded to give me a lecture about half-breeds and how they should all be destroyed. Oh shit, Triss cried, ducking behind James. Ah, Mr. Snape, I was just talking with the future Mrs. Snape about half-breeds and interbreeding. Disgusting, don't you agree? Umbridge asked, giving a grin that classified her as one thing, evil. I'm sorry Mrs. Umbridge, but I'm afraid we don't have the same views. I would also appreciate it if you kept your biased views to yourself, and I discourage you from harassing my fiancée about her heritage, James all but growled. Umbridge looked stunned. Obviously she'd thought she could play off of his pureblood card. She'd thought wrong. If you will excuse us. With that, James spun on his heel, an arm around Triss's shoulders, heading for the headmaster's office. Mr. Snape, what brings you and your lovely fiancée here today? Dumbledore asked formally as James and Triss entered the office. James knew why when he spotted Minister Christopher Umbridge sitting at Dumbledore's desk. Minister. Headmaster. James and Tris greeted. Is there something you wish to talk about? Dumbledore asked. James shook his head. Nothing that can't be taken care of later, headmaster. Good day, said James, Tris nearly pulling him towards the door. One moment, Mr. Snape. I think the opinion of another pureblood would be valuable in this conversation, the minister started. I don't think. Nonsense. My wife informs me that there is a half-breed at this school, not using names, of course. A law was never made enforcing half-breeds' inability to go to school in the wizarding world. Do you believe half-breeds, such as werewolves, should be allowed at the school? Umbridge asked. This sounds familiar, James thought. Yes, sir. I think half-breeds, as you call them, should be allowed to attend school and work with the rest of society, James said, formally. Umbridge, like his wife, looked stunned. If you will excuse us, Tris said curtly, pulling James out the door by the sleeve of his robe. Almost before James realized it, he was sitting on the sofa of his and Tris's shared room. She has a suicide quill, but it's been modified, Tris said immediately. What? James demanded. A suicide quill, as most called it, was a quill that a person that wanted to kill himself or herself charmed to do so. As the person wrote his or her suicide letter, his or her wrists were slit. In the late 1700s, a modified quill was made, used on students that were unruly as punishment. The ministry declared it illegal after a student bled to death after being punished with it. It was laying out on her desk next to a paper that said, I will not yell at professors. I think she's using it on the students she has for detention, Tris explained. That by.ch. Those are illegal. Do you know who has had detention with her so far? James demanded. Tris thought for a second. Draco had a detention with her earlier, said Tris, remembering what Jin had told her the day before. All right. Stay here, I'll be back later, said James, giving Tris a chaste key, before running off in search of Draco. As it turned out, Draco's detention had been moved to be served with Filch, so James hadn't been able to find out anything. Every other student that had served detention with her had refused to talk about it. Fred and George, as payback for the student body, pranked the teacher to no end. This resulted in several rules, which none of the students were happy with. Between working and trying to get Umbridge fired, James didn't have any time. Most likely it was for the best, as any time Evans came within 5 feet of him, she glared at him as if he were Voldemort himself. This went on until November, when Dumbledore informed James and Tris of Evans' impending delivery. How's she doing, Poppy? Tris asked, entering the hospital wing. Instead of being a general teaching assistant like James, she was helping Poppy in the hospital wing. Poppy, of course, knew what was going on, so accepted her help readily. James had to stay out with Potter, Minerva, Sarah, Holly, and Lizzie. Every so often Potter would look up and shoot James a glare for no reason, but James ignored it, content to wait, or talk with the now almost 5-year-old twins or Liz. After sitting outside the wing for several hours, everyone was called in. Lying in the hospital bed was a pink baby boy, being held by his cooing mother. Tris wasn't in the room, probably getting changed, or washing her hands. What did you name him? Lizzie asked, looking at the little boy. Harry. Harry James Potter, Lily replied, almost spitefully, glaring at James. James shook his head, tears stinging his eyes, before walking out of the wing, knowing where he wasn't wanted. Tris had come out in time to hear Evans pronounce the name of the newest member of the Potter clan, and James storm out of the hall. Walking over to Evans, Tris spat, "You're a real asshole. He has only even tried to do right by you, and your family, and what do? You throw it back in his face. Do you have any idea how lucky we all are that someone adopted him that would love him? You could have very easily created the next Voldemort, only a whole lot more powerful, and you wonder why he didn't think he could reveal himself to you." With that, Tris stormed out of the hall in a manner she had learned from James. It didn't end up being Tris who found James first, it was Kat. On his way down to his room, James ended up bumping into Kat, nearly making her fall backwards down the stairs. "Damon, what's going on?" Kat asked, after James had caught her from her near fall. "Nothing," said James, his voice hitching slightly. Why were you coming up from the dungeons? I had to go ask Dad something. Are you sure you're okay? Is Chris alright? Even with still getting used to James and Triss's new names, Kat hadn't made any slip-ups, nor had anyone else, surprisingly. No, everything's fine. Evans just had her baby. His name is Harry James Potter, said James, nearly pushing through Kat. Kat, after a talk with her adoptive father, knew of the significance of that name, and vowed to make Evan's life a living hell when she came off maternity leave. The nerve of that woman. One of these days she is going to alienate James so much she won't be able to get him back, if she hasn't already. Triss entered her and James's room with slight apprehension. Upon entering she found that every piece of glass in the room was shattered. Either that little display in the infirmary had hit him hard enough to give him a power surge, or he'd done the damage himself. From the blood splattered on what was left of the mirror above their fireplace to the right of the door, Triss figured it was the later. Casting several repairing charms, Triss used her wand to twist her hair up and out of the way before entering their bedroom. She was still very surprised her grandfather had allowed them to share a room, but he probably figured they would end up in the same bed no matter what he did. Well, he would have been happy to know that unless there was a massive thunderstorm, James and I would have stayed in our own beds, Triss thought. Since 2 nights before the tournament, James hadn't so much as looked at her in more than an affectionate way. Triss wasn't too sure why, but it was getting on her nerves rather quickly. The most intimate contact that had gone on between them was a few keys here and there, but those were always rushed, as if James had better things to do. The room was totally dark. There was a lone candle burning in the side of the room, but it wasn't enough to do much, being small and almost burnt out. Naturally, Triss nearly jumped out of her skin when a familiar pair of arms wrapped around her waist. Spinning on the spot, Triss's blue-green eyes met James's glassy green. Are you all right? Triss asked. Examining his face, Triss saw evidence of tears, and this was confirmed when James reached up to brush the stray watermarks away. James ignored Triss's question. I'm alone, you know. Now Triss was really confused. Of course not. You have me, and Dragon. James cut him off. Dragon lied to me about being family, and while I love you more than the world, you aren't family, James whispered. He was obviously very distressed. Triss shook her head. I may not be family, but I am your soul bond, and that alone says you'll never be alone. You will always have me, and whatever children we will have in the future, Triss said strongly, pulling James into a tight hug. When she finally released him, James looked at her, surprised. I thought you didn't want kids. Triss shrugged. I'll make exceptions. From that day on, James was nearly wrapped around Triss's little finger. They were always together, chatting, dotting, and other things not seen by the public. Their friends were happy to see that James no longer moped around, but was very energetic about everything. By popular demand, James had started up a dueling Dada class for students. All the students were very behind on their curriculum, but James and Triss were more than happy to help the students catch up to what they were supposed to know. However, after this got to Umbridge, she issued a law that no club be in progress without her knowledge, not that James and Triss paid any attention to the old crone's rules. However, their insubordination ended up getting Dumbledore suspended, and having Umbridge placed as temporary headmistress. James and Triss put up with the woman as best they could. Because they weren't really students or teachers, Umbridge didn't have any hold over them, even though she tried. They still tutored the students, as teaching the students how to properly defend themselves wasn't really a club, so to speak. As much as James loved pissing Umbridge off by playing loopholes, it was getting tiring. By OWL time in early April, James still didn't have his powers back, and everyone was worried. It was during the final OWL exam, astronomy, that all hell broke loose. While the students plotted the stars, James watched the ground, having been having very weird feelings over the past few days. He was about to turn to check on the students again, when shadow movement caught his attention. With his average eyesight, he was barely able to make out Triss's form. Quickly following was the huge form of Umbai.ch, as everyone had taken to calling her. James watched in total disbelief as Umbridge pulled her wand, and started shooting spells at Triss. She was able to dodge those, but when two others James couldn't quite see started firing as well, Triss started getting hit. James was still staring as a form he recognized as Evans walking out. He could hear her yelling from the astronomy tower, and so could the other students, who were watching with growing interest and horror. It was when James saw Triss and Evans both fall to a blast of red light that he lost it. It was almost as if a dam had broken open, and he felt every fiber of energy he had ever possessed come forward, building protective shields around itself. With a growl, James did the first thing that came to mind: he stepped off the tower. He could hear the screams of the students as he dropped, but when he was about 30 feet from the ground, James used his newly manifested powers, and shifted into a bright, blue-flamed phoenix. He knew every pair of eyes in the school were on him as he swooped at Umbridge, ripping her wand from her oversized frog-like hand. He did the same to the two men, neither of them putting up a fight, too shocked at the sight of the phoenix. Landing in front of Triss and Evans, whom had fallen side by side, James shifted back. "You," Umbridge yelled. "I'll have you put in Azkaban for this. Aiding a dangerous animal, and illegally becoming an animagus." James just glared. "I could have you put away just as easily. Using a suicide quill on a student, being the least of what I've heard," James growled. Okay, that was stretching the truth a little, but James honestly couldn't make himself care. "I order you now, leave. You can't tell me what to do, boy. I am the headmistress, and you will leave now," Umbridge yelled, trying to cast Hogwarts wards to remove James from the premises. Hogwarts, being a very smart and self-aware castle, recognized the blood of the founders and did nothing, her powers unable to work against her. Air. "You have 1 minute to leave before I take action," James warned. Umbridge was too stunned to say anything, and even more stunned when she felt the castle's wards slip out of her grasp. A minute passed, no one daring to even breath. "Feel forewarned," James growled. With a small wave, Umbridge felt herself lifted from the ground, unable to move. Her two escorts had been a little smarter, and had run when they'd had the chance and were now well beyond the gate. With another wave, Umbridge flew off of the grounds, deposited on the other side of the gate that was shut and locked behind her. The only other way to get into the school was through the forest, and anyone who tried that was just plain stupid. A little shaken, not used to the force behind his newly acquired powers, James waved his hand again, and both Triss and Evans were lifted from the ground onto stretchers. James had the temptation to leave Evans where she was, but he figured that would be bad for his karma, and escorted her to the hospital wing. In her unconscious state, Triss looked like her normal self, ears and all, but a quick charm from James changed that. He couldn't do anything about her ears, or his own, so opted just to leave it as it was. In the hospital wing he dropped Evans on a bed, leaving Poppy to her care, before racing down to his and Triss's rooms, staying ahead of the students. A spell or two later, Triss was sitting up. "That by.ch. I can't believe her. Please tell me you made her spontaneously combust or something," Triss asked, removing all the charms James had placed on her. James grinned. The thought of making Umbridge into little more than a pile of ashes had crossed his mind more than once. "I don't think I need to. She'll probably kill herself trying to find her way back into the castle. Because Dumbledore is gone, and I'm a legal heir, I hold the wards. She won't be getting in," James said with a grin. "Hey James. Mail," Triss yelled from the breakfast table a week later. For the time being, the school year had been halted and all the children that wanted to go were sent home. About 20 remained, including Kat, Rome, Mel, Jin, Ron, Luna, Fred, George, Draco, Lizzie, Neville, and several others. Evans had locked herself in her room with baby Harry and had yet to come out. James had made sure a house elf sent them meals regularly. Dumbledore had been back after the second day, looking like hell. Apparently he had tried to take refuge with the centaurs, and they didn't take kindly to him. James had had to go and get the old man himself. He was also pleasantly surprised to find Umbridge with the centaurs as well. Flashback. "Any idea where he could be?" Triss asked, walking just in front of James with the human-formed Jewel in the lead. Jewel knew the most about the forest, having spent much of her time there, so of course she had been the first to know about Albus's problem. Not a clue. This is Jewel's territory. I try and stay out of the forest when I can help it, James commented. He hadn't bothered to change back into the brown-haired, blue-eyed version of James Cage, seeing as everyone now knew he was a shapeshifter, as well as a relation to Severus Snape, though no one knew how. There was also speculation that he was related to Evans, but few dared try and guess how. Last James had checked, the rumor had been that James was the result of Evans' father and Severus's mother getting together. One of the things that divided witches from muggles was that they could have children well into their 70s, so it was perfectly plausible. To most in the castle, this was funny as hell. We're almost there, Jewel said, cutting the other 2-3s of the party out of their thoughts. A minute or so later, they came to a stop in a small clearing. Triss was the first to spot the bloodied Albus, while James had spotted Umbridge. With a snap of his fingers, the woman disappeared off to some muggle hospital. If luck was on James's side, no one would find her for several more days. James, give me a hand over here, Triss yelled, drawing James's attention. Held up between Triss and Jewel was an unconscious Albus Dumbledore, looking just a little busted up. Would it be safe to use magic on him? James asked, looking the man up and down. No, it would contradict the centaur magic, said Jewel. James nodded, and with some effort tossed the older man over his shoulder. While Albus was by no means fat, he was very tall and muscular, and muscle weighs more than fat, leaving the man at a substantial size. The small group had almost reached the edge of the forest when they were attacked by a group of rather pissed off centaurs. I think it's time to run, said Triss. I think I agree, Jewel responded. Back off, James growled, ready to defend at all costs. A tan-colored centaur came forward. Why should we listen to you, human? You are no one of great importance and you have something that belongs to us. He's my grandfather, so back off. Triss growled. We cannot kill them. All of them have very powerful auras, spoke another one of the centaurs. The tan one nodded. Very well. Leave, but do not enter the forest again, the centaur ordered, stepping away. James nodded in thanks, dropping down some of his guard. He had been ready to port out, thinking the centaurs wouldn't back down without a fight. He'd been wrong. End flashback. Dumbledore, while still suffering from dehydration, was better than he had been, and was currently under the watchful eyes of Poppy. Jim Potter had left with Sirius and Remus, going to recruit new Order of the Phoenix members and gather old ones. Cat, along with Snape and Jin, were all locked in the dungeons doing potion research. Every so often the castle rocked with an explosion, but the three always assured them it was no big deal. The twins, Ron and Draco, were neck-deep in the twins' prank research and everyone else was brushing up on some things. Minerva McGonagall, under orders from Albus, was to teach them to become illegal animagi. She was probably going to be shocked silly at how many of the group had already managed it. Snape had been in and out of the castle, answering summons and meeting with Lucius. Lucius, being within Voldemort's inner circle, had provided them with much information, including Voldemort's horribly weakened state. Rumor had it that, even with the unicorn blood still running in Voldemort's veins, he wouldn't live through an honest fight. Lucius had confirmed this, sort of. As of that time, Voldemort was living off of a form of basilisk venom, something that would kill him if he didn't find another source to feed off of, but was still a strong duelist. Alright, so what's the plan? Sirius asked. It was the first real Order of the Phoenix meeting in years. In the room there were at least 50 people, including James, Triss and the rest of their group. At first the adults were reluctant to let them in, but Triss, with a few select comments, put them in their places. Probably the strangest thing about the whole meeting was that it wasn't just witches and wizards, there were muggles and squibs as well. One of them, of course, was Triss's father, Brian Rockton. He looked about as happy to be there as Triss and James were to have him there. Add to the fact that he'd been glaring daggers at them the whole time, didn't help. At Triss's threat of spending the rest of his life on the couch, James agreed not to do anything to the older man, but that hadn't stopped him from getting the twins in on something. Let's just say, Brian's not going to have a pleasant evening. We need more people, said Ron. That was, of course, rather obvious. All in all, the final count of Order members was 56, against a countless number of Death Eaters and dark creatures. The werewolves and ex-werewolves have taken our side, as a sort of payment for the cure of lycanthropy. We've had no luck with the giants, and the elves won't even so much as look at us, much less talk to us, Remus reported. Mr. Cage, do you think you could sway the elves any? Jim Potter asked. James shook his head. No. They don't fight wars with humans. I might be able to get out a few friends of the family, but that's it. I'd have to talk to the giants. I've only ever met one or two, not including Hagrid and his girlfriend. The dwarves are in. An older voice squeaked. Professor Flitwick, ex-Hogwarts professor, was sitting on top of a stack of books, watching everyone carefully. That still won't be enough, said Brian. No shit. Triss and I will try and pull some strings, but I can't guarantee anything. I can get snakes and the like with ease, but so could Voldemort. The spiders in the forest have our back, no doubt, but the centaurs are neutral. We can probably rule out a lot of groups, like vampires. They, like elves, don't dabble in human affairs when they can help it. Most of the population of Ireland would come if I called. I'm related to half of them, and that half have friends. Problem is, a lot of them are muggles, James thought aloud, ticking things off on his fingers. Several people looked doubtful. Arthur Weasley was the first to voice his crossed thoughts. I don't think muggles would be much help. They can't even do magic, he said. I take it you've never seen a gun? Kat asked. Most nodded. Think of a concentrated severing hex that can't be blocked. Wizards have a really bad tendency of underestimating muggles. Truth is, that if a war sprung up between us and them, they would win. This has to stop. We can't think of muggles as us and them. That's thinking like Voldemort, which isn't very good. The only sides that can be taken at this moment in time are the light and the dark, and even then there are shades of gray, said Mel, taking the words right out of James's mouth. What do you mean, shades of gray? Kingsley Shacklebolt asked, looking at the girl as if she were insane. Draco took over. Do you know what the killing curse was originally made for? When it was made, no one knew. It was made during World War II when what's his name started became favorable to curses that were very painful, incurable, and deadly. A healer, Betty Summers, came up with it after she had to watch her own husband die after being subjected to such curses. It was meant to be a way to end it painlessly and fast for fatally injured people. The dark side got hold of it, and exploited it. Here is an even better example. The most basic levitation charm, Wingardium Leviosa, was designed by Hitler, who was a wizard, as a torture device to levitate people he was going to kill over a building to scare them before dropping them to their deaths. If those spells aren't gray, then I don't know what is, Draco explained. You know a lot about that kind of thing for a supposed light wizard, Shacklebolt growled. Only a few saw it, but the man's hand was on his wand. Shacklebolt, I swear to every god I know, if you fire a curse at that young man, I will rip you apart myself, Sirius said almost casually, but with an edge to his voice. Shacklebolt glared at the younger man. And you'll have a one-way ticket back to Azkaban. I always said you were AF. Get up fag, he growled. You would know, wouldn't you? Sirius growled. For those of them that had known Sirius since he'd first been found, their minds clicked to one of his worse injuries. Sirius, knowing full well that the group was catching on, continued. A prison guard that beeps the prisoners cause he has nothing better to do. Or is it that your wife wasn't giving you any? Sirius taunted. Shacklebolt, thoroughly embarrassed and angry, jumped at Sirius, knocking the man back and flipping his chair. It took 5 minutes and James and Remus to hold Shacklebolt back. In that time, Sirius had curled himself into a ball in the corner of the room, muttering to himself like a madman. Mel was trying to calm him, but was having very little luck. From an outsider's point of view, it looked like Sirius had taken on several injuries, including a bloody nose. Shacklebolt had fared better, having only a black eye from where Sirius had kicked him, while James and Remus pulled Shacklebolt away. Around the room was a stunned silence. While at least 15 of the people in the room had known about what had happened to Sirius, the rest didn't. Jim Potter looked the most shocked out of all of them. Never, In all the time he'd known Sirius, which had been a long time, had he seen him act like that. Even after Snape had kicked his ass for nearly getting him killed, had Sirius acted in such a way. The guilt from just standing by when Sirius was put in Azkaban rose, and Jim almost couldn't stop himself from breaking down and begging his once good friend for forgiveness. Shacklebolt, even with James and Remus holding him back, was still going for Sirius. Ginny, in full red-headed fury, slapped Shacklebolt hard. "Get out," she growled, her eyes turned from soft brown to hard, nearly glowing amber. She, like most of the small group, had come to see Sirius as a family member, and the day she let someone off for hurting him was the day hell froze over. Shacklebolt didn't seem affected at all, and it took a word from Dumbledore to get him to leave. "He's going to say something to the Ministry," said Fudge. "Let him try. Everyone in this room has a very powerful binding charm on them. If he tried to say something, it won't come out as being about us," Tonks said, looking gloomy, if not murderous. "She's right. Plus, if Dumbledore has his way, both Mr. and Mrs. Umbridge will be in Azkaban before the week's end," said James. "A little help over here would be wonderful," Mel yelled. Sirius, who still seemed to be suffering from a panic attack, was using the young woman as a teddy bear, holding her tightly as he rocked back and forth. "Tris, Poppy, that would be your area," said James. The last thing James needed at the moment was for Sirius to lash out at him for being male, something he really couldn't help. After almost 20 minutes of the three of them being unable to calm the dog Animagus down, Remus took it into his own hands. Grabbing the larger man's chin, Remus looked him straight into the eyes. "Sirius, snap out of it," he ordered. As if he'd been slapped, Sirius looked away, and then shook his head. "What happened?" he asked. "Episode," was Mel's one-worded answer. Sirius frowned. "Old Kingsley attacked you. Not that you didn't provoke him, but still. Come on, you're going home, now." It was well known that when Melanie Cruz put her foot down, she wasn't going to budge on her decision. With that said, she and Remus escorted Sirius out of them room, going back to their shared home. Tris shook her head, sitting back down in her seat next to James. No one, it seemed, was very happy about the goings-on in their group. "Anyone else with order compromising secrets?" James asked, more in jest than anything else. No one said anything. "Good. Potter, Evans is in the order, correct?" Potter nodded. "Then, why is she not here?" Potter gave him a look. "She's downstairs with the twins and Harry," he answered. "Next meet, she is to be here. Lizzie can watch Harry and the twins," James said, tossing a look over to the younger girl. She scowled and glared at him, but didn't argue. She knew that he would fill her in on the meetings, so she wasn't missing anything. "Easier said than done," Severus commented. He was sporting, yet again, a swollen nose, and it didn't take much brainpower to guess where it had come from. "I agree with Severus, for once. We tried to get her to come to this meeting, but she would have none of it," said Potter. "I will speak to her," said Dumbledore, having one of his, as James called, old person moments, where he aged several hundred years in a few seconds. Severus looked rather amused at that. "Good luck. Guess who she's really mad at?" "I'll make sure to keep a cold steak on hand, Severus." "Howler," Tris commented, looking up at the tawny owl flying towards the breakfast table. Sure enough, clutched in the bird's talons was the flame-colored letter. The owl swooped down and dropped the letter on James's plate. "Open it," said Tris, setting down her fork and turning to face him. James rolled his eyes and pulled the letter open. Shouting immediately filled the air. "James Cage, what is wrong with you? Not inviting me to the Order of the Phoenix meeting. I should skin you alive. Expect me on Monday," the howler yelled. James and Tris both paled. "Who was that from?" Draco asked with a raised eyebrow. "Trinity," James choked. Everyone looked at the table, looked at him in confusion. "Who is Trinity?" Kat asked. "Let's just say, she's not a person to be messed with, and she's just a little spoiled." "She's also in love with James," said Tris, glaring at her plate. "No worries, love, I can stand her either. Especially after the whole Beep incident," James said with a shiver. Beep incident. This had come from Jim Potter, who seemed very interested in the conversation. Next to him was his wife, who wasn't looking up, but obviously listening. James shook his head. This was one of the more embarrassing events of his life. Trinity is a princess, for lack of a better word. When she turned 1000, her father gave her permission to choose a husband. I, at the time, was 6, and visiting the realms with Derek. She saw me and fell in love at first sight. On my 7th birthday, not long after my arrival, her gift to me was a box of elven beeps. For a reason unknown to me, elves can mate earlier in their lives than humans, and marriage contracts can be formed and executed while still in infancy. She, of course, was to choose me as her husband, and tried to consummate the marriage. At that age, I had no interest in girls, and was then chased all through the kingdom by her, wielding the box of beeps the whole time. She's popped up at dragons a few times since, but Triss has always been able to rescue me, said James, giving his soul bond an affectionate hand squeeze. Draco shook his head. Jin, I think I'll be needing a bodyguard, along with every man in this castle, he commented, diving back into his eggs. Few heard it, but Evan snorted. All right, I have to go to the library, I'll see you all in a bit, said Triss, standing up. You sure you don't want me to come? James asked, looking up at Triss's standing form. Triss reached down and gave him a light key on the cheek. Yes, I'll be fine. Why don't you do something constructive, like ward our rooms from Trinity? Will do, love, said James, as Triss left the hall. So when are you going to pop the question, James? Fred asked, stuffing a buttered roll in his mouth. The question? James asked, though he had a feeling on what the twins meant. The twins shook their head at their younger friend's naivety. Well, James, when two people love each other very much. You and Triss. The male in the relationship normally, at a serious point in the relationship, asks for the female to join him in holy matrimony, whereupon the temporary insanity of love shall be cured. At this, Mel snorted into her oatmeal, trying, and failing, to hide it as a cough. None of your business, James answered easily. The issue had already been well covered. They weren't going to get married until they were out of school and Voldemort was dead. Fine. Don't tell us, but you are aware that we expect to be invited to the wedding? Jin asked. Yes. Now, while you all go run around, I have to go ward the castle against the destructive force of Trinity, James growled, rolling his eyes. We'll see you later then, James, said Kat, poking the still laughing Mel in the ribs. Later. James had been building ward for the better part of the day now. Triss had come down to check on him once, and to bring him lunch, but he'd been too busy to chat much with her. Building wards strong enough to block the powers of elves was power draining, not to mention nearly impossible. One wrong move and he would have to start all over again. Triss, knowing this, had gone off to hang out with Jin, Kat, Mel and some of the other girls close to her age. James had a feeling they were plotting something but wasn't stupid enough to ask what. Jewel was hardly around anymore, preferring to rally some of the more deadly snakes within the vicinity of the castle. According to her, if asked, most of the forest would come to his aid. This put James at ease, at least, more ease than he'd been at since Voldemort's reappearance. James only had a few more spells to cast when he felt a familiar presence behind him. Muttering the last of the spell he needed, James sighed when he felt all of the spells come together. Now that everything was together, he was tired. Did you need something, Evans? James asked, shrugging back into his shirt. He was very sweaty, so the white cotton shirt didn't make much of a difference. Evans started to say something, but James, having a feeling on what she was going to say, cut her off. Look, Evans, I know you don't like me, and I really don't get along that well with you. If you've come up here to try and cut me down some more, you're wasting you time. I accepted a long time ago that you didn't want me as your son, and I'm well past over it. I have my own family, so as far as I'm concerned, you're just a professor that doesn't like me for some unknown reason. Now, if you don't mind, I'm tired and I have several guests arriving tomorrow morning and I must prepare. With that, James spun away from the older woman and walked into his room, mind set on getting a shower. Hey James, check this out. Triss called as her boyfriend entered the library, his hair still wet from a recent shower. What is it? James asked, reading over Triss's shoulder. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches. Born to the one who thrice defied him. Yet the spawn of the one who betrayed him. Marked as an enemy at the age of innocence. Yet awakened in half form. Thought as a snake, but really a lion. The boy shall be abandoned in thought, but not in heart. Caught in the fires of darkness and light, he will come into his own. While the final battle approaches. When was this one made? James asked, inspecting the prophecy. 1980. Doesn't give the seer's name, Triss answered. James shrugged. That's interesting. Why all the research in prophecies? He asked. Remember a couple of years back when we thought Dumbledore was working to some kind of prophecy, but we couldn't figure out what it was? Triss asked. James nodded. I think this is the one. It makes the most sense. Born to the one who thrice defied him, the son of Lily Potter, who was working against him. Yet the spawn of the on who betrayed him, the son of Severus Snape, who is a spy. The only other person it could be is Dre, but his mother has never defied Voldemort. Marked as an enemy at the age of innocence, you were very young when he gave you that scar, still innocent. I'm not sure what the rest of it means, but it fits the best, Triss said, pointing to the important parts. James shrugged. You know very well my view of prophecies. I don't think they're at all accurate or decipherable, at least until they've already happened. At this point, I'm more worried about my own health when Trinity arrives. Hopefully, and this is a big hopefully, she'll find another love interest, James said, crossing his fingers. Triss grinning in a downright evil way. If I have my way, she will. So, who are you going to try and fix her up with? James asked. Serious. What? Come on, James, you know they'd be perfect for each other. Both are horribly annoying, and tend to be in the middle of things they shouldn't be. Unless, you want me to try and fix her up with your dad. Triss asked innocently. He'd kill her right off the bat, though I'm not so sure that would be a bad thing, said James. This earned him a hard slap from Triss. Alright, I'll stop plotting to kill her. Triss glared at him. You mean you've had other plots to try and off her? Triss demanded. James smiled sheepishly. Glad to know I'm not the only one, Triss commented offhandedly. This was followed by a loud crashing sound. Early the next morning, James and Triss were woken by a flustered-looking Severus bursting into their room. There is a girl here looking for you, he said, motioning to his son. James growled in annoyance at being woken, and stood, clad in his boxers. Triss did the same, only slightly less annoyed than James was. The two bleary-eyed teenagers followed the older man to the great hall after making themselves presentable. You would know Trinity would just burst in at 6 in the morning. I don't need to be up for another 4 hours, James complained. If there was one thing he hated, it was not getting enough sleep all at once. He wasn't a person that could function on less than 8 hours of sleep at a time. Following Severus, they entered the hall to be immediately greeted by a tall blonde, blue-eyed woman. James, it's so good to see you again, she yelled, eyeing him, before jumping on him in a hug. Ditto. I'd like you to meet my girlfriend, Triss, James growled, pushing Trinity off and slipping an arm around Triss's waist. Trinity glared rather noticeably at Triss, before turning back to James. As a favor to you, I was able to secure a rather large section of the Elven military, able to come to your assistance when I call for them, Trinity said, flashing James a sickening smile. Triss rolled her eyes, unimpressed, and she could tell James was trying not to do the same thing. You didn't have to go to all of that trouble, Trinity. I'm well aware that elves prefer not to dabble in business that is not their own, James said, trying not to let any anger seep into his voice. It was nothing. All I ask in return is that you reconsider my offer, she said, looking at him suggestively. No. Rest assured that Triss and I are very happy together, and do plan on getting married after all of this is said and done with, James said, not trying to break the news to the woman softly. Trinity looked a little disappointed, but didn't let it get her down too much. Very well. I accept and respect your decision, said Trinity, even if her eyes were saying the exact opposite. James nodded. Hey Dobbs. James yelled, breaking a slightly awkward silence. There was a pop and a small, shy creature appeared. Dobbs, can you do me a large favor and show Trinity and the rest of her company to rooms? James asked. Dobbs nodded. James and the creature had prearranged to send Trinity and her company to rooms as far away from Triss and James as possible, meaning they were sharing the North Tower. 20 minutes later, James was back in his bed, with the intent of sleeping until noon. This wasn't to be, however, as one soon-to-be ex-minister decided to send him a wake-up call. Umbrage, James growled as the castle shook. Looking at his bedside alarm, James saw it was only 7:30. Royally pissed and ready to kill, James stormed to the grounds, a silver light pulsing around him. As the heir to Rowena Ravenclaw, I strip you of your title as minister and reinstate Cornelius Fudge as minister, regardless of his half-state, James yelled, not bothering to leave the castle steps. There was a loud yelp, thump and small light show before all was silent. The next person to wake me up will suffer a fate worse than death. James threatened, stalking back to his shared room. 5 4 3 2 1, James mentally counted. As predicted, Trinity burst into the room on the count of 0. Being the loving couple they were, James and Triss were sitting together in one of the many large, cushy chairs in the private reading room of the library. I really hate to break up the lovely couple, but I think we have a problem, said Trinity, seemingly oblivious to the way James and Triss were sitting. Bang. You know, Triss, I think I just felt the whole castle shake, James commented, standing. There was another loud bang, and the floor shook again. I did just feel the castle shake. No, really. There are roughly 200 or 300 people outside trying to break the castle wards, said Trinity. James nodded. Hogwarts feels pissed. James Potter burst into the library, a stream of blood running down from a cut on his temple. We're being attacked, he declared. Plan of action anyone? Triss asked. Hey Hogwarts, feel free to do your thing. James yelled to seemingly nothing. The school rumbled for a minute, before there was the sound of another explosion, followed by complete silence. Everyone looked confused. James, what did you do? Triss asked. I didn't do anything. Hogwarts has her own defenses that Dumbledore didn't set off. He may not be able to, so we really can't get on his ass about it, yet. Anyway, Hogwarts more or less just sealed herself off to those she feels she can't trust with her safety, James explained. What about your dad? Triss asked. James paled and took off into a run, the dungeons being his destination. Thankfully, he found the oversized bat right where he left him, over a steaming cauldron. Are you all right? Aside from drops of potions getting tossed in together because of the whole bloody castle deciding to shake, resulting in multiple explosions, I'm fine, Severus growled crankily. And to think, I thought I had to worry about you, James shot back, rolling his eyes. Snape glared at him. It was quite obvious he was having a version of PMS only the elder Snape could have. The only time a brat like yourself has to worry about me, is if I'm lying on my deathbed, which I don't intend to have happen, ever, Snape hissed, returning to disposing of ruined potions. Whatever. You work on your plans to die in battle. I have to go talk to Dumbledore about the cause of our own miniature earthquake, James grumbled back, disappearing from the dungeons as easily as he'd appeared. So, what's your verdict? James asked. Following the minor attack on the castle, he'd met up with Dumbledore to discuss upping the security around the castle. Several hours and many aspirin later, James hoped the headmaster, holder of most of Hogwarts wards, had come to a decision. I think the only thing we really can do at this time is allow the castle to hold her own defense system. We don't have enough order members to do much in the way of patrolling the grounds. I also doubt the animals of the forest are going to be very cooperative, Dumbledore reasoned. James nodded, partially agreeing with the old wizard. As a total, the order had, maybe, 300 people. According to Lucius Malfoy, Voldemort had over 1,000 new recruits, not to mention all of the returning supporters. As far as spies within Voldemort's circle went, there were 4. Severus, Lucius, Draco, and another unknown. I'm going to have a talk with the spiders in the forest. I'm sure they would be happy to help us watch the grounds. I honestly don't think Hogwarts can keep out everyone that could pose a threat to her. She can't just lock out students that have the potential to be Death Eaters, James responded. Dumbledore opened his mouth to respond when another explosion shook the castle. Here we go again, James sighed. There was another explosion, but it didn't cause a minor earthquake. James' eyes lit up. I'll be right back, James yelled. He took off down the stairs like a 5-year-old on Christmas morning. Upon reaching the entrance hall, he was met by a very familiar pair. Jack, Nix, James yelled, embracing the young man and woman. The young woman, Nix, punched James in the arm. You need to teach your castle not to blow people up, Shadow. That's our job, Nix laughed. Cage, what's with all the explosions? This came from a singed and agitated potions master. His face was covered in soot and his hair seemed to be smoking. Jack spoke up. Sorry, sir. That's our fault. My dear sister is a little trigger happy, Jack commented. Nix smacked him. Nix and Jack were half-demon chaos twins, and couldn't help but cause destruction wherever they went. The difference between them and traditional demons was that they looked human. Both were dark-haired and light-eyed. The only way you could really tell them apart from regular humans was their slightly sharper teeth and their tendencies to blow things up. We see that. I have warning next time you decide to blow up the castle. Snape yelled, stalking towards the stairs to the dungeons. What crawled up his ass and died? Asked Jack, pushing his shaggy blonde hair out of his face. Buddha knows. Tell me, Shadow, he's not of any relation to you, is he? You look just like him, Nix commented. My father, sort of. He and I don't get along that well. Then again, people that I'm related to have never gotten along well with me, James commented, almost looking sad. Anyway, I take it Triss called for the two of you. James half asked, half stated. No, actually. It was a certain snake of yours. I'm actually glad she called for us. I would love her nothing more than to hand Voldemort's ass back, time him in a plastic pretzel jar, Jack growled. Like James's parents, Jack and Nix had lost their mother to Voldemort. Because their father was a freelance demon, they'd never really met him, making them orphans. Even at the independent age of 26, both of them were still vengeful. Nix broke in. So, if your dad's here, I take it your mom is as well? She asked. Yep, along with her husband James Potter, daughters Sarah and Holly, and newborn son Harry, James practically spit. Hold up, I thought that was your that by.ch. Nix yelled, understanding dawning on her. Jack put a hand on his twin's shoulder. Chill, Nix. Anyway, I have good news for you. The demons have agreed not to take sides, thanks in part to your grandfather. Originally, they were going to go with Voldemort like last time, but that was before Voldemort threatened to kill them all, and you know as well as we do that they would never consider joining the light side. Wonderful. That's one less enemy to worry about. Come on, I'm sure Triss wants to see the two of you. After that, I'll get you set up with rooms. Triss was ecstatic at seeing Jack and Nix. They had met some years ago, when James and Triss were still little. They'd been living in their demon forms around Dragon's house and had saved the, at that time, children James and Triss from a group of vengeful fire demons. The arrival of the two demons also provided a reason for James to hide from Trinity. However, according to Triss, Trinity was having some quality time with Sirius. It seemed that's what most people were doing. Kat was off with Rome, Mel was with Vlad who had transferred to Hogwarts, Draco and Jin were in the library as far as James knew, and the twins were planning with two of the guest female elves that had caught their attention. After hours of talking with the two older demons, James was about to suggest showing Jack and Nix to their room, when there was a knock at James and Triss' door. It was Draco. Voldemort's forces are mobilizing, right now. He isn't going to wait any longer. Severus and my dad have already been called. I'm not marked. I don't have to go, but he's going to be here soon, Draco gasped, breathless from the run to their room. James jumped into action. Triss, go find everyone, make sure they're indoors. No one is to leave. Nix, Jack, come with me, James ordered. James, I'm not sure if we have enough explosives for what I know you're planning, Jack said. Between you, me, Nix and Hogwarts, I think we'll be fine. If absolutely necessary, we can call reinforcements, but I really don't want that, James responded, leading them back up to the entranceway. Nix looked at his like he was insane. You plan on taking on a whole army between the three of us and the castle. You're more cracked than I thought. There's no way, Nix yelled. James didn't respond. He was too busy planning. If everything worked the way he wanted it to, then the whole threat would be over before most of the castle even know what was going on. Checking his pocket for his wand, James waved his hand at the castle's main doors. Warm summer air swept in, but there were no threats to be seen. Come on. Jack, go over by Hagrid's hut, and stand ready. Nix, you take the willow. I got the front gate. If you blow anything up, make sure it's in groups. Hogwarts will handle the singles. Don't try Voldemort and watch out for our spies, James instructed. Your dad is going to be so pissed. I hope he didn't start any important potions before he left, Nix commented, sprinting to her designated position. Boom. What, exactly, do you have going on in that human brain of yours? Jewel asked, slithering up James's leg. The human in question jumped. He hadn't even heard the serpent approach. Well, Jewel demanded. Ever seen King Arthur? James asked, grinning like a madman. So you have a full army of moots waiting by the forest to shoot them? Jewel asked skeptically. Nope. I have elves and my own personal bomb squad. James responded. Jewel transformed into her human state. Wonderful. Can you tell me why this will work? She asked. I don't think it will, but we have less of a chance going face to face with, at the most, 100 wizards. Not all of the elves can do magic like we can. It's complicated, but at least here we'll catch them off guard. Element of surprise, no. James asked, ducking into his hiding spot. Jewel just switched back into her serpent form. I'll never understand your logic, Jewel commented, slightly bewildered. Neither will I, but so long as it works, it's fine, said James. Draco said they were mobilizing, so there is no set time for an attack. How can you be so sure they're attacking? This could be a distraction so they can go after the ministry. Jewel warned. It's not, said James, his voice sure. How do you know that? As a snake, Jewel sometimes saw things differently than James did, but James knew he was right. My head burns. Voldemort has been trying to break my defenses for about 15 minutes, ever since Draco said something to me. Are you sure he can be trusted? Yes. So long as you're sure. Speaking of the ugly, James said, eyes glued to a figure moving slowly across the grounds alone. James could tell by just his posture that he was expecting something. Voldemort is on his guard. He knows something, James commented. Or he has something that you don't know about, Jewel said, foreshadowing. At that moment, several explosions sounded, followed by screams of pain. Thank you, Jack and Nix, James whispered, watching as the ground exploded in several places, sending the invading Death Eaters flying. I don't see why you don't just use your power to kill them all, and then go after Voldemort, said Jewel, crawling up James's arm. Voldemort has had control of my powers, and he has a natural resistance to them now. If I thought I could kill him that easily, I would have just imploded his mind. As it is, there is a small chance that I will die along with him if he dies. What? Jewel demanded. Did you ever bother to tell Triss about this? No, and I don't plan on it. She wouldn't have let me leave the bedroom if she knew about that little detail. Just trust me, I don't plan on dying, and if I do, I don't plan on staying dead. Jewel nipped his arm. Stupid human, always thinking you can escape death. I just hope you know what you're doing, because more lives than your own are on the line right now, Jewel hissed, disappearing in a puff of smoke. James wondered what Jewel was talking about. He knew very well that no matter what, if he died, Voldemort would come with him. Then it hit him. Through their bond, James and Triss, very souls were connected. If he should die, and his soul slip away, Triss would be dragged with it. It was a huge risk, one that he didn't want to take, but couldn't help. Voldemort, who had somehow managed to miss the attacking elves, and Nix and Jack's firework display, stood about 50 feet from the main hall, putting himself in shooting range of some of the students firing out of the castle windows. Cage! He screamed, his voice that of Satan's. No one moved. All spells stopped. When nothing happened, He pulled something from his robes. Wrapped up in a blanket was small Harry Potter, wailing in discomfort and possible pain. Come out now, or I will kill this child. Voldemort yelled. No matter how much James resented the baby, he wasn't about to let him die at the hands of Voldemort. Leave him be. The familiar voice of Lily Evans Potter yelled. At the front doors of the castle, a white-faced James Potter and Arthur Weasley were dragging her back inside. Come out, Cage. Voldemort yelled again, his wand now trained on the baby. Put the child down, Tom. James yelled, stepping out of his hiding place. Voldemort turned around to face him. Voldemort grinned. You're not as cowardly as I first thought, Cage. I'll tell you what, I'll give your life for his, Voldemort said, holding the baby up. You set him down, allow him to be returned to his mother, and I'll face you down in a duel, James bargained. He wasn't about to just toss his life out on the line without some guarantee. Voldemort glared at him, and set the child on the ground. Before James could erect a shield around the child, Voldemort cast the Cruciatus curse on the baby. Harry screamed, and James felt the child's power spike, before Voldemort was blown backwards, closer to James. James caught sight of a flash of blonde hair, before he was attacked from behind by a large, smelly figure. At first, James thought T was a troll, but a troll wouldn't have been able to sneak up on James like that. Pushing himself into a standing position, James saw that the thing looked a lot like a goblin, but had the size and power of a troll. Before James could really react, the thing had picked him up, and slammed him into the ground. He hit the ground hard enough to create a small crater. James, even with all of his power, didn't escape the hit unscathed. Forcing himself to crawl out of the hole, he felt a sharp pain in his side every time he tried to breathe in, and his head throbbed. There was a scream from behind him and he hardly had time to get out of the way before the troll goblin hit the ground. Where it had once stood, was Jewel in striking position. Bloody ridhooves. Taste horrible, she hissed, slithering off. Surveying the grounds, James saw people emerging from the castle, wands out, fighting the remaining Death Eaters. Why can't anyone King listen to me? James growled as a student fell due to an unknown spell. Even after everything Nix and Jack had done, there were still a lot more Death Eaters than there were light fighters. The elves helped, but they were at a disadvantage, because they relied on weapons instead of magic. In the thick of all of this were several familiar faces. Triss, sword in one hand, wand in the other, was shooting off all of the spells she could think of, and slicing apart any dark creature that came within range. Fleur and Victor and Cedric, for a reason unknown to James, were covering each other's backs about 10 feet from where Triss was. Potter, Remus, Sirius and Arthur were not far away, doing everything they could. Everyone else was either still by the doors, or was on their own, not holding their own well. Voldemort was nowhere to be seen, so James did the only thing he could at the moment. He jumped into the crowd of ever-thickening Death Eaters. Lucius, Severus and a few others had removed their masks, fighting against the Death Eaters. Several people, from both sides, were on the ground either injured or dead. James was on a roll after a while using only his wand. He didn't want to use up more energy that he absolutely had to, and his wand was his best resource. Cutting through the masses, James could have sworn he even saw Dragon fighting, along with Libby, but he wasn't sure. James pulled his arm back to fire another round of spells, when he felt it being ripped from his grasp. Apolocalibs! James yelled. His two best swords appeared in his hands, and he continues cutting through Death Eaters, quite literally. After a few minutes, he found himself missing his wand, as it was a lot easier to take out Death Eaters with it than with the elven daggers. Because it was so close ranged, he had to look out for the students and order members that popped up every so often as well. Finally growing tired of the heavy blades, he summoned his wand, and banished the blades. James was more than a little surprised when he came across a black-robed person that seemed resistant to the spells he was shooting off. It took his adrenaline-filled mind a few minutes to realize it was Voldemort. Amovio anima corpus! James yelled. Voldemort screamed as the spell hit him. James grinned. The spell was one of his own designs. It boded the soul permanently to a certain surface. It was sort of like what the other word used to bind ghosts to a certain area. Lugolo. There was a splatter of blood, as Voldemort's hood fell down, showing clearly his serpentine face, now covered in blood. A large wound on his neck bled horribly, and he slowly turned an ash-white color. Umbra Vindex all. James screamed at the top of his lungs, all his power behind the spell. He immediately felt his power drain, almost to the point of death. Sliding to his knees, James watched as hundreds of misty figures circled around the dying form of Voldemort, some that James knew, and some that he didn't know. First and foremost, James recognized his parents, Alex and Emma. They stood over him, watching him in concern. "Take the bastard to hell," James growled. His power was draining rapidly, and he was fighting to even stay kneeling. Emma smiled down at him, and he felt Alex's misty hand brush over his head. "We will do as you say, son. We love you," Emma's voice echoed in his mind. There was a great explosion, and that was the last thing James remembered. James's eyes opened, seeing the white void around him. "James." The voice yelled. The voice was feminine, but James couldn't tell where it came from. "Where are you?" he asked. "James, you are to be given a choice." The voice echoed. James was confused. "What kind of choice?" "You may return to your world, and to your friends, however, I do not know if your physical body is intact. I can also send you to a different world, one where your mother didn't decide to give you up," the voice said. "Where's Triss?" James asked. That was really the only thing on his mind. He didn't care about anything, be it life or death, except Triss. "I cannot say. Your love for her cannot be allowed to make your decision," the voice said sternly. James was very tempted to tell it to F.K. off. "I choose to go home. I don't care about the shape of my body, I care about my friends and family." James yelled. "If you choose this, you may lose the chance to live a normal life forever," the voice argued. James growled. He was in no mood to argue with the disembodied voice. "Send me back to where I belong," James ordered. "As you wish," said the voice. James felt a tug, not unlike that of a portkey, and his world faded into darkness. All James could see was darkness. It had been like this for a long time now. Be it days, weeks, or months, James didn't know, but it was a long time. Every once in a while he would hear a voice talking to him. He never heard entire conversations, but he had heard something about a new baby, Triss, Sirius's impending marriage, and baby Harry's powers already developing. One time he could have sworn he'd even had Sarah and Holly bounce on him telling him to wake up. All of these things, James couldn't be quite sure had happened. More recently he found himself hearing the voices more often, and wasn't completely sure he hadn't gone insane. After all, insane people never know they're insane, do they? However, the time in the void was giving James a lot of long-needed thinking time, and the first thing he planned on doing after he got out of the darkness was he was going to beg Triss to marry him. While James had said that he and Triss planned to marry, he had never formally asked her, or put a ring on her finger. It was just assumed that the two would get married, without any real sign to show it. James had even picked out a ring in his mind. After that, he was going to hug every single person he knew. His time in the void, with no one to talk to, had made him miss human company, and realize exactly how much he had taken everyone for granted. "Do you think he'll ever wake up?" This was undoubtedly the voice of Mel. James wondered once again if he was making the voice up. Hermione's voice responded, "He better. I don't know how Triss will get along if he doesn't. He condition already has her so depressed, I'm afraid she won't live if he doesn't wake." James swore he could feel the fabric of the starchy hospital sheets. He was so worried about Triss, his mind hardly realized it. "What's wrong with her?" James asked, his voice meant to be strong, coming out in a gurgle more than anything else. "James." Ginny's voice screamed. For the first time in a long time, James blinked, seeing light. James just repeated his question. Slowly feeling was coming back into all of his limbs. He could feel his fingers twitching, and his strength coming back. He could see the shapes of Ginny, Hermione, Mel, Roman, Draco and Vlad all hovering over him. "Jin, go get Triss," Roman's voice ordered. As he said this, James pushed himself into a sitting position, feeling abnormally weak. James, you need to lay back down, said Draco, trying to push James back onto the bed. He was shoved off roughly by James. What happened? James asked, rubbing his eyes. Slowly the figures around him were getting clearer. You've been in a coma for over 4 months, James. Vlad yelled. It was surprising to all of them that James was sitting up. Figures, James thought. Pushing a hand through his hair, he was surprised to find it at his normal length, sitting just below his shoulders. Touching his ears, he felt the point that they came to, and knew he was in his normal form. This also explained why his muscles weren't mush from not being used for 4 months. What happened? Is everyone all right? Is Voldemort dead? James asked. He had so many questions, and it seemed he had so little time. Draco laughed. Take a deep breath, James. Yes, everyone is all right. Somehow, we didn't lose anyone, but some people did lose limbs. Voldemort, as far as we know, is little more than ash at the bottom of the lake. By the way, Evans and Snape made a public announcement, claiming you as the heir to the Snape estate, and 1/4 inheritor of the Evans estate, and holder of the Potter estate should something happen to Evans and Potter, until Sarah, Holly and Harry turn 18. Cool, huh? Draco asked, nudging James. James nodded, his slow brain processing the information. Evans and Snape claimed me as theirs. Why? I know the whole defeat of Voldemort thing is a huge deal, but still. They would claim me just because of my fame, would they? James thought. The thought of actually getting to know, and being accepted by his parents was a very exciting one, but James didn't allow his hope to jump. He was ripped from his thoughts by a large figure jumping on him. Falling backwards onto the hospital bed, he opened his eyes to see Triss's dark blue ones. Her flaming red hair framed her face, touching James's. James had never seen a more beautiful sight in his life. Even if Triss was sickly pale, and much thinner than James remembered, he still found her beautiful. Reaching up, and tucking her hair behind her ear, James felt the familiar point of her ear that he had. He looked at her questioningly, and then seemed to notice the bulge being pressed against him. Pushing Triss back by her shoulders, he came face to face with her telltale bulging stomach. How long? James asked, looking up into Triss' slightly insecure cerulean blue eyes. 6 months. I found out a little while after you fought Tom, Triss whispered. Tears had gathered in her eyes. Before the battle, and before James had slipped into his coma, he had made it very clear he didn't want any children until after they had graduated and been through university. He also said he didn't want to get married until then either. It was quite obvious she thought James would make her give the child up, one way or another. James grinned at her, pulling her into a real, passionate kiss, for what seemed like the first time in ages. When Triss pulled back, James looked directly into her eyes. Triss, I have a very important question to ask you, said James. Tears had started to fall down Triss's face, making her look even paler. What? She asked. Will you marry me? James asked. Triss stared down at him for a minute, not quite processing the information. Will you? James asked again. He could feel the tugging on his soul bond, a tug that he hadn't felt in well over a year, since Triss' miscarriage. It made him smile. Focusing, he tugged on her end of the bond, tightening it. I'll take that as a yes, said James, pulling Triss down into another kiss, as a grin crossed her face. Are you sure you can walk all right, James? Hermione asked for what seemed like the 10th time in 5 minutes. Yes, Hermione. If I can go raid the kitchens at night for Triss, then I can walk, James growled, finally getting annoyed. It had been 2 days since he'd woken up, and a day since he'd been moved back into his own rooms with Triss. Triss, true to any pregnant female, had very strange cravings in the middle of the night. Rather than risk letting Triss wander the halls by herself at night, James had gone for her. Surprisingly, his muscles hadn't really deteriorated at all in the few months he'd lain comatose. So long as you're sure, Hermione responded, knowing that she was starting to push James's patience. James nodded, wondering where they were going. Hermione had said that it was a surprise for his birthday, which was today. All he knew at present time was that they were very close to the Great Hall. After several more minutes of walking at the agonizingly slow pace Hermione had set, they finally did reach the Great Hall. Tossing the doors open, James was nearly blown backwards by the force of the "Happy Birthdays" yelled by the crowd. James could have sworn that every person he knew was gathered in the hall. When he got close enough, he was nearly smothered in hugs. Among the group were Sirius and Remus, Sirius with a glowing trinity on his arm, and Remus with, very surprisingly, his Aunt Libby. Derek was there, acting very friendly with Minerva McGonagall, Sarah, Holly and Harry's babysitter and ex-Hogwarts professor. Tris was sitting at the head table with Dumbledore, who looked extremely uncomfortable in her presence. The night of James's waking, Tris had told him about how much she had disturbed her grandfather with her cravings, and flowing him at odd hours to go get her pistachio ice cream or other such items. James laughed at the look on the older man's face. Of course, Lily and James Potter were at the party along with Sarah and Holly. Sarah and Holly had greeted James enthusiastically, as did Lizzie, who was seeing him for the first time since his waking. And of course, the most surprising couple at the whole party was Severus and a young female half-elf by the name of Lena. She was probably one of the prettiest elves James had ever met, not that he really cared about how she looked. Like Snape, she had long ebony hair, but elven blue eyes. Unlike normal elves, her skin was darkly tanned, a sign of either having a dark-skinning ancestor or spending a lot of time in the sun. Tattooed on her exposed shoulder was probably the whole reason Snape liked her so much. She was branded with the mark of an expert alchemist. James was happy that everyone was finding their life mates, even if they didn't know it yet. After partying and dancing until the early hour of the morning, Tris pulled off James to bed. He really couldn't find any way to be happier at the moment, and made sure all knew it. "Daddy, wake up!" a little girl yelled, jumping up and down on the bed. She was very young, being 4, maybe 5 years old. As she jumped, her auburn hair flew everywhere, outlining her emerald green eyes. Standing next to the bed was a boy about the same age, with raven hair, courtesy of his father, and deep blue eyes. "I don't think that's going to make them get up any faster, Jamie," the little boy said. He was obviously the girl's twin. "Shut up, Will," James shot back. While exchanging verbal jabs with her twin, she hadn't noticed her father and mother peek out from under their blankets. Grinning like a mad woman, Tris, who didn't look any older than she had the day James woke, grabbed her daughter, and James snagged his son. With twin squeaks, the two children disappeared under the blankets. After 2 or 3 minutes of the twins struggling to get free, Jamie finally said, "Come on, Daddy. You promised that you would take us to see Grandma Lily and Papa James." "Yes, but it's only 8. I doubt they're even up yet," James reasoned. "Yes, they are. Harry just called on the telephone," Will contradicted. James let out a growl of slight annoyance. He had been looking forward to a few more hours of sleep. "Fine," James said, sitting up. With a grin, he sent his children out of the bedroom to go get ready. Tris looked at him curiously, following his lead in getting ready for the day. "Why are you grinning like the cat that got the cream?" she asked finally. "Mom and James agreed to take the hooligans for the weekend," James said. Tris burst out laughing. After several years of getting to know each other, James was just starting to get comfortable calling Lily and Severus Mom and Dad. Will and Jamie had caught on to calling Lily Grandma and James Papa. They called Severus Papa Sevi, and Severus's new wife, Nana Lena. They addressed Dumbledore as Grandpa Albie. James never ceased to get a kick out of his children's names for his family. "You're so evil, James. What makes you think they won't be too much for Lily to handle?" "She is going to have her next child soon," Tris reminded him. James groaned. Lily, for reasons James didn't want to fathom, was still having kids. Her next child, a boy due within the month, would make for her 5th child. James just hoped Lily didn't get the same surprise of twins that he and Tris had gotten when Tris had given birth. The last thing either of the young parents had expect were twins, even if they did run in both sides of the family. "I'm sure it'll be fine, Tris. After all, they did volunteer to take them. Plus, Dad and Lena will be there with Sebastian and Tae." I think they can control the twins between the four of them. They owe us after all the times we've watched Lizzie, Sarah, Holly, Harry, Sebastian and Tae for them, James reasoned. Triss nodded, agreeing. They had taken the other children quite often all of them at once. Thankfully, Lizzie, Sarah, Holly and the 3-year-old Tae weren't much trouble, and generally kept each other entertained. It was the team of Harry, Jamie, William, and 4-year-old Sebastian that were trouble, especially when together. Albus, having seen just how mischievous and troublemaking the group was, feared the day they went to Hogwarts. As it was, James and Dumbledore had paired up to try and keep all of the children's accidental magic to a minimum. Half-elves and founder decedents weren't exactly a weak mix. How's Libby doing, while we're on the subject of children? Triss asked. She's all right. Remus is nearly ripping his hair out from the stress, but I've assured him everything will be okay. After all, Libby is part elf. I don't think a 4-werewolf pup litter will hurt her, James commented. Triss shivered. She'd thought giving birth to twins was bad. Actually, I think Sirius is the worse off. I swear, any kids he has with Trinity will sweat sugar, as hyper and eternally happy as Trinity is, James commented. Triss chuckled. Why is it all of the old people are having kids? We're the only ones our age out of our group with kids, Triss growled, pulling her hair into a ponytail. It's because we're so much more mature. Don't worry, I'm sure everyone will start reproducing real quick. After all, Draco just got the go-ahead to marry Ginny from her father, and Hermione and Mel want to finish school before thinking about getting married, James explained. Triss nodded. Come on, I'm sure your parents are waiting for you, said Triss, pulling James out of the room, with him still trying to slip his shoes on. You all are early, Jim Potter commented as James flowed into the kitchen, Will in his arms. Triss quickly followed with Jamie. James started to respond when Harry burst into the room. Jamie and Will kicked out of their parents' grasps and ran off to play with their uncle. It seemed Harry was a little bit eager to see Jamie and Will, and was ringing our phone off the hook, James explained, helping himself to the coffee on the counter, pouring himself and Triss a cup. I know the feeling. Harry's been bouncing off the walls since 6:30. Ouch, James commented. Jim nodded. Well, hello James. You're early, Lily Potter said, entering the kitchen. James nodded. How are you feeling, Mom? He asked. I've felt better. Tired. I swear, he's going to be more difficult than you were, said Lily, pouring herself a plain cup of milk with mint. James raised an eyebrow. Jim chuckled. Don't doubt her. I remember when she was pregnant with you. I thought she was going to kill me with all of her weird cravings. This one is several times worse. I swear, I'm going to name him Jack just for all of the Cracker Jacks Lily's eaten, Jim said, looking at his wife wearily. Please Jim, I'm not that bad. Even as Lily said this, she popped a Cracker Jack in her mouth. For anyone who doesn't know, a Cracker Jack is a piece of caramel-covered popcorn. Triss chuckled once more. The only thing she just couldn't get enough of during her pregnancy was ice cream, and that wasn't very uncommon for anyone of the female species. Have you thought up a name yet? Triss asked, thieving a Cracker Jack from Lily's stash. Lily glared at Triss, then at Jim. Of course, Jim is holding fast to his name being Jack. I wanted to name him Derek, after my father, but my father seems to have many reservations about the subject. James chuckled, and started to comment further when he felt a tug on his jeans. Expecting to find Will or Jamie at his feet, he was surprised to see Harry there. Can I talk to you, Thotto? Harry asked, his bright green eyes, very much like James's, glowing with sincerity. James couldn't help but notice how cute the child was. Harry couldn't pronounce James at all, so he latched onto James's nickname, Shadow, and even then he had trouble pronouncing it. Sure bro, what's up? James asked, lifting Harry into his lap. Alone? Harry said insistently. James shrugged. It wasn't the first time Harry had insisted that he talk to James alone about something. James figured he must be nervous with the new baby coming into the house. After all, Sarah and Holly had the same reservations when Harry was born. Tossing an apologetic look over his shoulder, James swept into the living room, Harry in his arms. Why does the kid never come to me when he wants to talk? Jim asked. The same reason will always seeks you out when he has a question, Triss responded. What did you need to talk to me about, Bolt? James asked, setting Harry down on the sofa. With some of his lesser used powers, James had been able to figure out that, should Harry ever try to become an anime guy, he would be a dog of some sort, most likely very fast, thus the name Bolt. Jack is evil, Harry said, security in his voice. James lifted an eyebrow. He knew Harry probably wouldn't like the idea of a baby brother, but this wasn't something he expected. With having an older brother who defeated a Dark Lord, it was very serious for him to accuse someone of being evil. What makes you say that? I was playing around and accidentally cast a spell. Resero Ingenium. The one Daddy casts whenever he gets a funny-looking letter. The spell hit Mommy in the tummy, and made her glow red, Harry explained. James was thunderstruck. The spell was one that Jim designed to tell good from evil. White for good, red for evil. He knew Harry was smart, probably more so than he was at that age, but not smart enough to make a story like that up. What should we do? James asked. Knowing the kid, he already had a pretty good plan formulated. We have to kill him, Harry said definitely. You know we can't do that, Bolt. It would make Mommy very sad, James explained. To be honest, he couldn't think of anything better, but he wasn't about to voice it. Harry frowned. He's gonna be more powerful than Voldemort. You could always defeat him later, if he decides to really be evil, Harry suggested. You're right. I'll tell you what, Harry. I believe you, but we have to wait to see how baby Jack will grow up to be. If he grows up bad, we'll catch him, okay? James asked. For some reason, this all felt strange, yet very familiar. Kind of like how it felt when Dragon explained his role in life for the first time. No doubt these kids would probably have to deal with something similar. Okay, Thotto. Harry responded, rebounding from a serious face to happy toddler mode, as James called it. Returning to the kitchen, James cleared his face and his thoughts. He didn't want to worry anyone. What did Harry want to talk to you about, James? Triss asked as soon as he re-entered the kitchen. Nothing. Just the typical fears of becoming a big brother, James explained. Typical. What did you tell him? Lily asked. She remembered going through the same thing with Sarah and Holly before Harry was born. I just explained to him that it wasn't going to be any different, he was just going to have someone else to play with, and that he would always be my favorite little brother, James said with a shrug. 3 little brothers, 3 little sisters, all at least 12 years younger than you. Don't you feel old? Jim asked. James grinned. No, I just remind myself that all of the old people just got started late. Young people today, no respect. You know you just admitted you were old, right? Damn smart ass. Thunk. Ow. Lily, that hurt. James stood in the hall outside of the maternity ward, waiting for the news of the child to be named, Jack's birth. Lily had gone into labor earlier in the night, leaving Harry, Sarah, Holly, and Lizzie with James and Triss. A few hours following, Jim had called, saying that James needed to come up because of complications. That had been over an hour ago. Finally, Jim came out through the double doors of the maternity ward. The older man had tears running down his face, and James couldn't help the rock forming in the pit of his stomach. What happened? He asked as Jim neared. While the two might not have gotten along some years ago, they were pretty good friends now. Lily miscarried, Jim sobbed. They're not sure if she's going to make it. Shit, James growled. He thought something of the like might happen. Nature is trying to keep the balance, he thought. It's all right. She'll be fine, James said, pulling the older man into a hug. Jim accepted. James understood the feeling of loss he was feeling. He'd felt the same way when Triss had miscarried several years ago. If something happens, I don't know what I'll do, Jim said, pulling back. Nothing will happen. I swear on my own life, that nothing will, James said, his voice confident. He could feel Lily's life force through the walls, and it was still as strong as ever. Jim nodded. He'd learned a long time ago not to doubt anything the kid said. At one point he'd even thought the kid was a psychic, because he was never wrong, almost. Jim and James sat outside the maternity ward for a long time, James keeping close watch on Lily's life force, and Jim praying for his wife's well-being. Nearly an hour and a half later, an official-looking healer came from the ward. "Good morning, Mr. Potter. I thought you would like to know that Lily is going to be fine. We repaired all of the internal bleeding and other damage, but we couldn't do anything for your son. Lily is in recovery, and can take visitors, one at a time. I'm sorry for your loss," she said, sounding indifferent. That was one of the reasons James hated hospitals, magical and muggle. The healers and doctors were so indifferent to what went on around them, and it tended to piss James off, even if he knew why they were like this. They saw people die every day, and if left to dwell, it would eventually impair their judgment, causing deaths of others. "Do you want to go see her?" James asked, pulling Jim from one of the hospital-issued plastic chairs. Jim nodded, and disappeared through the swinging doors. James returned to his seat, waiting for the next set of news. At around 7 in the morning, an hour after Jim had left, a nurse came into the room. James, who had been lightly dozing in the plastic hospital chair, didn't notice, and nearly killed the poor woman when she tapped him on the shoulder. "James Cage?" she asked. James nodded. "Your mother wishes to see you, and your wife called earlier. Mrs. Potter is in room 4A, one floor up. You can use the phone in her room," said the nurse. James nodded. This was one of the reasons he loved Muggle hospitals. He could actually use the phone. It took him about 5 minutes to reach room 4A, where he found Jim sitting in a chair next the pale form of Lily Potter. "Hey Mom," James whispered, pulling a chair up to the other side of her bed. Jim was passed out, his head lying next to Lily's hand. James couldn't blame the guy, it had been a rough night. "Hey," Lily's coarse voice answered. She looked like she'd seen better days. "I'm sorry about Jack Mom," James said, taking Lily's other hand in his own. Lily shrugged as best she could. She was fighting to stay awake. "I've had disappointments with children before. I guess this is my body trying to tell me it doesn't want any more kids. I can take a hint. So, when do I get my next grandchild?" Lily asked. James chuckled. "Not for a little while, Mom. I think Dumbledore is still traumatized over Will and Jamie's birth. I hate to think about what another would do to him." Lily chuckled lightly. James could tell she was trying not to cry. They talked for a while longer, until Lily felt the need to sleep once more. With help from one of the nurses, James set up a cot in Lily's private room, setting the rock-like Jim on it, before leaving. "James, is that you?" Lying on their bed with Jamie, Will, and Harry sprawled around her, was Triss. She'd seen better mornings, but James wasn't about to criticize after spending the night in a small plastic chair. She lost the baby. She had some internal damage, and had to have surgery. Jim is still there with her, sleeping off the night in a cot. "They're both pretty broken up over it," James said, lying down on the bed, kicking off his shoes while trying not to roll onto Will. Triss sighed. "I'm sorry, James. I know they were looking forward to having another boy," said Triss, rearranging the children so that she could curl up next to James. "Yeah, Mom says she expects another grandchild to make up for it," James said with a grin. "I told her Dumbledore was still disturbed from Will and Jamie's birth." "You got that right," Triss grinned. "So, when are we going to tell everyone about our next edition?" Triss asked. James shrugged. "I think the real question is, what are we going to name her?" James asked. "How do you know it's going to be a girl?" Triss asked. "The same way I knew Sarah and Holly would be girls. Trust me, the last thing I want is to be surprised again," James said, giving the twins at their feet a meaningful look. "What about Marie, after your grandmother?" James asked. Triss looked thoughtful. "Depends on whether she has your hair or not," Triss said, laughing. "God forbid the child be cursed with my hair," James said dramatically. Triss just chuckled. Even with the recent loss, all still felt right for the two of them, as it always would, no matter what Dark Lord rose and fell. All that mattered was that they were now part of a large family, totally unbreakable. To be continued. I hope you enjoyed this story. Also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.